Hey guys, tonight we sink into the most relaxing facts about the Hubble telescope. The kind of facts that don't demand your attention so much as gently borrow it, the way a warm blanket borrows your shoulders. You can almost hear the room you're in right now. Maybe a soft fan pushing air in lazy circles. Maybe the distant hush of traffic. Maybe the faint little creak your house does when it remembers it's made of wood and gravity. And in that same quiet, you picture another kind of room. A launch control room, lights low, screens glowing, people speaking in calm, clipped voices like they're trying not to wake the universe up. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough to type, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from, and it's oddly comforting to imagine all of us scattered across different nights, different mornings, different little pockets of quiet. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're there at the edge of a moment that feels both massive and strangely delicate. The sky is dark, proper dark, the kind that makes every light on the ground look important. And the air has that almost electric stillness that happens when people are waiting for something to move. A rocket launch is loud, obviously, ridiculously loud. But the seconds before it happens have their own hush, like the world is holding its breath out of politeness. And you're thinking about what's sitting on the pad, tucked inside the payload bay of a space shuttle. Not a weapon, not a shiny trophy, a telescope, a literal, oversized human decision to look more carefully, which is honestly a pretty wholesome use of advanced engineering. If you ignore the part where it's riding a controlled explosion into the sky. Humans are funny like that. We'll strap a delicate instrument to a thunderbolt and call it scientific progress. The telescope has a name that feels calm in your mouth, Hubble. It's named after Edwin Hubble, the astronomer who helped show that the universe is bigger than we dared to assume. Bigger and still expanding. The name carries that same vibe of widening horizons, like opening curtains in a dim room and finding out the room has a whole other wing you never noticed. On April 24th, 1990, the Space Shuttle Discovery lifts off on mission STS-31 with Hubble riding inside. You don't have to memorize the date, but you can feel it. The era where screens weren't as sleek, where the technology looked chunkier, where the excitement had a different texture. It's not nostalgia you're feeling. It's the softness of human continuity. People then wanted what people always want, to see what's out there, to understand where they are, to make the unknown slightly more friendly. The countdown rolls towards zero, and there's a moment where the idea of up becomes serious. Fire blossoms beneath the shuttle. The sound arrives as a physical force, a deep punch that you feel in your chest, in your teeth, in your ribs. It's almost too much. And still, your mind stays drawn to the quiet purpose inside that roaring ascent, a telescope that's going to spend its life looking patiently without ever needing applause. That's one of the first relaxing truths about Hubble. Its job is steady. It doesn't chase. It doesn't rush. It doesn't panic scroll through the cosmos. It simply points, holds still, and collects light. And if you're the kind of person whose brain likes to sprint at bedtime, that idea can feel like permission. You could be a little more like Hubble. You can be still. You can gather what comes to you. The reason Hubble needed to leave Earth in the first place is also strangely soothing, because it's about removing interference. Down here, the atmosphere is protective and beautiful and necessary. It gives you air to breathe and sunsets to stare at and the ability to complain about humidity. But it also shakes and blurs the light coming from distant objects, like looking through water that's always moving. From the ground, even the best telescopes have to deal with that shimmering distortion. Hubble's calm genius is simply stepping above the problem, not fighting the atmosphere, not yelling at it, not demanding it behave, just rising beyond it. You can picture the shuttle in orbit, doors opening like a slow reveal on the biggest stage imaginable. The payload bay gapes toward the blackness, and inside sits this white, cylindrical body with solar panels folded like wings waiting to unfurl. There's a gentle elegance to it. It's not sleek like science fiction. It's practical, bright, a little bulky. It looks like something built by people who were more concerned with will it work than will it look cool? And that's comforting too. It's honest engineering. Then comes the moment of release. Not dramatic, not flashy. A robotic arm reaches in with deliberate care, the way you might lift a sleeping cat without waking it. Hubble is eased out, slowly rotated, guided into free flight. No fanfare in space, no sound, no cheering that carries into the vacuum. Just the visual of a human-made, eye-opening in orbit. That contrast, Earth's roar versus space's silence, is one of the gentlest thoughts you can carry. Down here, so many things are loud. Notifications, obligations, opinions, someone's car alarm at 2 a.m. for absolutely no reason. Up there, in the thin edge of low Earth orbit, the background is quiet enough that a telescope can live its entire life listening to light. You might imagine Hubble's first breath as its systems wake up, power flowing from solar arrays that unfold and begin drinking sunlight. Gyroscopes getting ready to help it point. When people talk about Hubble, they often jump straight to the famous images, the colorful nebulae and glittering galaxies. But it's worth lingering in this first moment, because there's an intimacy in beginnings. A telescope being placed into orbit is, at its heart, a promise. A promise that we will keep looking even when we don't know what we'll find. A promise that curiosity can be gentle, not frantic. A promise that wonder can be a quiet practice. You can almost feel the shift in the people who built it and launched it. The launch is the climax of years of work. And then, suddenly, there's less for human hands to do. The telescope is free. The light will be collected whether anyone is watching the live feed or not. The universe doesn't need an audience. And that, honestly, is such a relaxing thought. So much of life feels performative. So much of your day can feel like you're being observed, measured, judged. But Hubble's work happens beyond that. It observes, but it isn't observed in the same way. It exists in a place where nobody is commenting, nobody is scoring points, nobody is asking it to be productive in a way that makes sense on a calendar. It's just there, circling in the dark, preparing to do the simplest and most profound thing. Look. You can picture the first time it turns toward target. Not rushing, not snapping into place. A careful repositioning, a steady hold, a patient stare. Even the idea of a telescope staring is kind of funny because it has no emotions, no opinions, no drama. It doesn't care if what it sees is pretty. It cares if it's true. And there's something deeply soothing about that kind of impartial attention. If you've been carrying a lot, work stress, family stuff, that low-grade anxiety that sits behind your ribs like an unpaid bill, the image of Hubble can act like a little mental reset. A machine built to be steady. A machine built to wait. A machine that finds meaning in faint signals and tiny details. It's the opposite of doom scrolling. It's slow scrolling the cosmos, but with purpose and without the comment section. And as the shuttle drifts away, leaving Hubble behind, you can feel the beginning of a long, quiet relationship between humanity and the night sky. Not the sky you see from your window, with its streetlights and its haze, but the deeper sky, the one that holds ancient light and patient truths. The launch fades behind you, the roar dissolving into memory, and what remains is the simplest image, a bright, white cylinder in darkness beginning its calm watch. Your breathing can match that calm. In through the nose, out through the mouth, no hurry. The universe will still be there on the other side of sleep. Hubble will still be there too, turning its attention gently outward, collecting light like it's gathering bedtime stories. Quiet, endless, and strangely kind. The quiet gets deeper once the shuttle is gone. Like someone closing a door softly in the next room, and suddenly you realize how much space there is inside silence. Hubble is alone out there in the best way. Alone like a lighthouse is alone, doing its job without needing company, without needing praise, without needing to explain itself. And you can follow it, not with your eyes, but with your imagination, as it slips into a rhythm so reliable it almost feels like a lullaby written in physics. Hubble lives in low Earth orbit, roughly the altitude where the planet still looks close enough to feel personal. It doesn't drift off into the far dark. It stays near, circling the Earth again and again, like it's keeping a gentle promise to come back around. One orbit takes about 96 minutes. You can let that number settle the way a steady beat settles a song. 96 minutes to make a full loop. Not fast in the way your anxious brain is fast, but fast in the way a calm, practiced dancer moves through a familiar routine. And that's the first relaxing fact of this section. Hubble's life is made of repetition. Not boring repetition, comfort repetition. The kind you rely on when you want to feel safe. A familiar route home. The same mug for tea. The same pillow that your head instantly recognizes. Hubble repeats its orbit dozens of times a day, and the world underneath changes like a slow movie. Oceans rolling, clouds rearranging, cities flickering in and out of view. The telescope doesn't get distracted by any of it. It simply keeps time. If you've ever felt like your days are a blur of unpredictability, messages coming from every direction, plans changing, emotions doing whatever they want, this is where Hubble starts to feel like a friend you didn't know you needed. Because in space, routine is not a trap. Routine is survival. You don't wing it in orbit. You don't just go with the vibes. You build a rhythm and trust it. Hubble's rhythm is more than just circle the Earth. It's also a careful dance of pointing. When it wants to observe something, say a nebula, a galaxy, a star, it has to aim with extreme precision. Imagine trying to hold a laser pointer steady on a coin across a football field while you're riding a merry-go-round. That's the vibe. The telescope uses reaction wheels and gyroscopes to orient itself. It turns without thrusters most of the time because thrusters would cause tiny vibrations and use up limited fuel. So it spins wheels inside its body to twist itself around in the vacuum. Silent, smooth, and oddly elegant. There's a kind of gentle sarcasm in that, if you think about it. Down here, you can barely keep your phone from wobbling when you take a photo of your dinner, and Hubble is out there rotating itself, using spinning wheels like it's a perfectly behaved ballerina in a place with no friction at all. Meanwhile, you're fighting gravity just to get comfortable in bed. Respect. But the soothing part isn't the flex. It's the stability. Hubble doesn't jerk around. It doesn't flail. It doesn't do dramatic turns. It nudges itself into position, then holds still, really still. And when it holds still, it collects light over time. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. That kind of long attention is rare on Earth. The world rewards speed and noise. Hubble rewards patience. This is where you can start feeling the narrative slide from launch excitement into orbital calm. The tension leaves the story like air leaving a balloon. The telescope is where it needs to be. The danger of ascent is over. The mission becomes quiet work, steady, methodical, strangely soothing. You can picture Hubble's orbit like a loop of soft ribbon around the Earth. Every loop includes pieces of day and night, sunlight and shadow, warmth and cold. It passes over oceans that look like ink, over deserts that glow faintly, over storms that swirl like cream in coffee. It does this over and over, and the repetition makes the Earth feel less chaotic. From orbit, borders don't shout. Schedules don't matter. The planet becomes a single, breathing thing. And then there's another calm detail. Hubble can't look everywhere at once. It's not a wide-eyed creature taking in the whole sky. It has rules. It avoids pointing too close to the sun because direct sunlight could damage its instruments. It avoids bright Earth reflections at certain angles. It chooses targets based on an observing schedule, an itinerary for attention. That schedule is planned carefully because in orbit, you can't afford random. There's something comforting about that too. Even wonder has structure. Hubble's time is divided into observing windows, because every orbit brings changes. For part of the orbit, the telescope is in Earth's shadow. For part, it's in sunlight. Some observations need darkness. Some can happen in daylight. There are times when Earth blocks the view of a target, and Hubble has to wait for the next pass. Waiting isn't failure. Waiting is built in. The universe isn't going anywhere, and neither is the telescope. You can let that idea soften you. Waiting is allowed. You don't have to force progress every second. If your mind tries to sprint ahead, tomorrow's tasks, next week's worries, you can remind it that even Hubble, the famous eye in space, spent a lot of time simply waiting for the right angle. And the funny part is that Hubble's orbit makes it a little like a person who never quite settles into a single time zone. It sees sunrise and sunset about 16 times a day. 16. Your body sees 1, maybe 2 if you're living the chaotic lifestyle of accidentally stayed up until dawn. Hubble gets 16. It's like the universe is constantly turning the dimmer switch up and down, and Hubble just accepts it. No complaints. No ugh, another sunset already? Just quiet adaptation. That constant cycling also gives Hubble a kind of heartbeat. A predictable pulse, bright, dark, bright, dark. And if you imagine it in your mind, it starts to feel like breathing. Inhale light, exhale shadow. Inhale light, exhale shadow. Your own breathing can borrow that cadence, slow and steady, the simplest rhythm you've carried since the day you arrived on Earth. You might also find it relaxing that Hubble's life is not glamorous most of the time. It spends a lot of time doing what sounds boring in a meeting, but feels satisfying in reality. Calibrations, checks, routine maintenance. It points at known stars to test its focus and alignment. It measures instrument behavior. It corrects tiny drifts. It's like the telescope version of making your bed, small acts that keep everything ready for when it matters. And because Hubble is above the atmosphere, it sees with a clarity that ground-based telescopes can't always match. That doesn't mean Earth telescopes are useless, far from it. But Hubble's view is steady in a way that feels like a deep exhale. No shimmering air, no turbulent distortions. When Hubble locks onto a target, the light comes in clean, and the images can be sharp enough to make you feel like space is close enough to touch. That sharpness isn't just aesthetic. It's emotional, too. Clarity is calming. A blurred world can make your mind try harder, strain more. A clear world lets you rest. That's why a tidy room can feel peaceful, why a quiet lake feels soothing, why a clean line of text is easier to read than messy handwriting. Hubble is clarity incarnate. You can imagine a typical night for the telescope, except it's not night, not exactly, because it's orbiting through day and night like a bead sliding along a string. It receives a new target in its schedule. It rotates gently. It steadies itself. It opens its attention. Photons arrive, tiny packets of energy that have traveled unimaginable distances. Some of that light left its source before humans had language, before we had cities, before we had the concept of bedtime. And yet here it is, arriving at a mirror made by human hands, being guided into instruments that translate it into data, into images, into knowledge. If you let that sink in, it's hard to stay tense. Your problems are real, your life matters, but the scale of this is so broad it can loosen the grip of daily stress. A tiny slice of light, traveling for ages, ends up in a telescope that circles Earth every 96 minutes. It's like the universe is telling you, gently, that time is bigger than your panic. And there's another relaxing layer to the orbit itself. Because Hubble is moving so fast, about 7.5 kilometers per second, it doesn't fall. It's constantly falling, actually, but it keeps missing the Earth because it's moving sideways so quickly. Orbit is basically an elegant compromise between gravity and speed. The telescope is always falling, always free, always supported by motion. There's something poetic about that if you're lying in bed feeling like you're falling through thoughts. Falling doesn't always mean losing. Sometimes falling is just a different kind of staying. You can almost sense the telescope's confidence in the math of it. Not emotional confidence, of course. Hubble doesn't feel proud of itself, but the system is stable. Gravity pulls, velocity carries, the orbit holds. The predictability is soothing like a metronome. And maybe your mind wants a metronome right now. Something that's not arguing with you. Something that doesn't ask you to be better, faster, more. Just a steady, repeating motion. 96 minutes. Loop, loop, loop. The Earth turns slowly beneath. The telescope glides above. As you follow that motion, you start to realize the story doesn't need to rush toward the big discoveries yet. The calm itself is the point. The wonder is built from patience. Hubble is not a firework, it's a candle. It burns for years, quietly, and because it burns steadily, it illuminates more than any single flash ever could. And as the orbit continues, the light and shadow keep trading places like gentle waves, setting up the next thing you'll feel in your bones. The quiet mechanics of space. The way Hubble moves through sunlight and darkness like a breathing creature made of metal and purpose, preparing for the long, soothing work of seeing. Light and shadow keep trading places beneath you like waves taking turns on a shore, and Hubble rides that pattern with the calm of something that has accepted its schedule. The sun comes on without warning. No gradual dawn haze, no pink horizon, no golden hour influencer moment. In orbit, sunlight is a switch. 1 second you're in velvet black night. The next second you're lit up like a white instrument on a black stage. Every edge crisp, every panel gleaming. And you can feel how that would change the whole mood of existence out there. Down here, morning arrives with negotiation. Curtains, clouds, sleepiness, coffee. Up there, the sun is either present or absent, and Hubble doesn't get to complain about it. It just responds. Quietly, reliably, like a professional. That response is one of the most relaxing facts about the telescope if you let yourself notice it. Hubble is basically a master of transitions. It can go from sunlight to shadow and back again and again, without losing its composure. Your brain could take notes, honestly. Your brain hears one unexpected email notification at night and suddenly thinks it needs to rewrite your entire life plan. Hubble gets thrown into thermal extremes 16 times a day and keeps its attention steady. Because the sunlight isn't just light. It's heat. It's energy. It's a kind of invisible pressure that warms surfaces quickly. When Hubble is in full sun, parts of it absorb warmth, while other parts radiate heat away into space. Because in a vacuum, the only way to lose heat is by radiating it. There's no air to carry warmth away. No brise. No comforting convection. Just you, your materials, and physics being very honest about your choices. Then the shadow hits, and it's not a bit cooler. It's cold with intention. It's the kind of cold that isn't trying to be dramatic. It's simply the default of space when the sun isn't actively pouring energy into you. That swing, warm to cold, back to warm, creates tiny expansions and contractions in metal and glass. And on a telescope that has to aim like a surgeon, those tiny changes matter. This is where the calm gets almost ASMR level, because the solution isn't loud or frantic. It's insulation. It's careful design. Hubble is wrapped in multi-layer insulation, thin sheets that look a bit like crinkly foil blankets, because that's basically what they are, thermal blankets for a space telescope. They help keep temperatures stable, smoothing out the extremes so the instruments inside don't have to live in a constant state of who turned the thermostat into a prank. You can picture that insulation like layers of quiet, layers that dampen the sharpness of change. That idea alone can feel soothing because you could do a version of it right now. You can't control every temperature swing in your life, every shift in mood, every surprise. But you can build layers, routines, boundaries, small comforts, a fan hum, a familiar voice, a steady breath. Hubble also uses heaters, small, controlled warmth sources, to keep certain components within safe ranges. Again, not dramatic, not glowing red sci-fi coils, just practical little heaters that keep sensitive parts from getting too cold. Imagine being responsible for a telescope that has to remain precise while cycling through sunlight and darkness 16 times a day. You don't hope it works. You engineer calm into it. Even the solar panels, those wide wings that gather sunlight, are part of the story's gentle rhythm. In sun, they drink energy and feed the telescope systems. In shadow, they can't. So Hubble carries batteries, stored energy, like a creature storing warmth through the night. When it slips into Earth's shadow, it runs on that saved power quietly, without fuss, until the next burst of sunlight returns. There's something comforting about the way that mirrors how you live. You gather energy during the day, food, rest, small joys, and then you spend it later, sometimes in the dark hours when nothing new is coming in. The trick isn't to never run low. The trick is to have reserves. Hubble is built for that. It expects darkness. It plans for it. And the silence out there makes the whole thing feel even softer. On Earth, change comes with sound. Heat comes with crackles, fans, HVAC noise, street noise. In space, there's no air to carry sound, so the transitions are visually dramatic but acoustically non-existent. The sun hits. No sound. The shadow falls. No sound. The telescope moves. No sound. The only noise is the quiet, internal whisper of electronics doing their work. And even that isn't sound away, you know it. It's more like a steady intention. If you imagine drifting alongside Hubble as it enters shadow, it feels like watching a giant, calm animal close its eyes. The bright glare fades. The edges soften. Stars appear in full force, not twinkling like they do through Earth's atmosphere, but sharp and steady. And Hubble doesn't react emotionally to that beauty. It just uses it. It uses stars as reference points, as anchors, as a way to know exactly where it's pointing. Stars become its compass, its calm grid. That's another relaxing detail. Orientation in space isn't about guessing. It's about reference. Hubble uses sensors to track stars and confirm its attitude, its pointing direction. It's constantly checking itself in gentle, methodical ways. Like someone who's grounded enough to pause and ask, where am I actually, instead of spiraling? Not a bad habit to borrow, if you think about it. When your thoughts start racing, a quiet internal star tracker can help. What's real? What's present? Where's your body? Where's your breath? The dance between sunlight and shadow also shapes Hubble's observing life. Some instruments prefer stable thermal conditions. Some observations are scheduled around when certain parts of the telescope will be warm or cool. It's not just look at that galaxy. It's look at that galaxy at the right time, with the right stability, with the right background conditions. The cosmos isn't a buffet you rush through. It's a meal you savor at the right temperature. And there's a sweet irony in that. Humans love to imagine space exploration as bold and heroic and fast. Hubble's daily reality is closer to careful housekeeping in the quietest neighborhood imaginable. Thermal control, power management, pointing stability, a calendar of attention. If you want a relaxing vision of science, it's not always fireworks. Sometimes it's a very competent system keeping itself comfortable enough to do exquisite work. You can also feel how sunlight itself becomes a kind of companion. Hubble is powered by it. The sun is not just a bright object. It's the reason the telescope can keep thinking, keep seeing, keep recording. That sunlight has been shining for billions of years. Long before Hubble, long before Earth had anything walking on it with opinions. And here it is, calmly feeding a machine built by a species that only recently figured out how to stop eating raw food on purpose. That thought can make you smile in the dark, because it's both humbling and adorable. The universe is ancient and vast, and you're here, listening to a bedtime story about a telescope that runs on sunlight and patience. It's ridiculous in the best way. The shadow periods are soothing for another reason too. They remind you that darkness isn't empty. In Earth's shadow, Hubble isn't off. It's not powerless. It's still alive in its steady way, running on stored energy, holding its orientation, sometimes observing targets that benefit from that darker background. Darkness becomes a working condition, not a threat. If you've ever felt uneasy about the dark, about nighttime thoughts, about the way your mind gets louder when the room gets quieter, this is a gentle reframe. Darkness is part of the cycle. It's expected. It can even be useful. Hubble doesn't fear it. It uses it. And those temperature swings, warm, cold, warm, are also a kind of cosmic breathing, a slow inhale and exhale in mechanical form. Warmth expands materials, cold contracts them, and the telescope has to stay precise through it all. So the structure is designed to minimize warping, to keep the optical path stable. The idea of engineering something to stay calm through constant change is quietly inspiring. It's a reminder that stability doesn't mean never changing. It means changing without breaking your focus. You might imagine the telescope's exterior as a protective skin. Under that skin, the instruments are sheltered, held in a controlled environment as much as possible. Hubble isn't just floating, it's being carefully kept in balance. Heat radiates from specific surfaces called radiators. Insulation reduces harsh swings. Heaters nudge things back toward the sweet spot. The whole system is like a gentle orchestra playing the same piece on repeat, never rushing, never getting tired of the rhythm. And while it's doing all that, Hubble continues to be a collector of light, quietly gathering photons that don't care whether the telescope is warm or cool, sunlit or shadowed. Light arrives either way. The job continues either way. The cycle doesn't interrupt the purpose. It just frames it. If you stay with that image, Hubble gliding into shadow, wrapping itself in thermal calm, running on stored sunlight, you start to feel the next layer of the story approaching without forcing it. Because keeping a telescope stable through those cycles requires precision. Precision requires care. Care leads you toward the heart of what makes Hubble so soothing to think about. The way tiny details matter. The way patience beats panic. The way even imperfections can become part of a larger calm. And as Hubble slips back into sunlight again, bright, sudden, clean, you can almost feel the telescope steadying itself through another transition, like it's smoothing the edge of a wave, preparing for the kind of focus that can turn faint light into clarity. Sunlight hits again like a clean, silent bell, and the outside of Hubble warms while the inside stays devoted to steadiness, like a quiet mind inside a busy day. Beneath the insulation, beneath the panels and radiators, and all the practical armor, the real magic sits in a place that almost feels too simple for how much it changes your understanding of the universe. A mirror, waiting to catch light the way your hands might catch warm water under a tap. Patient, open, not trying to squeeze it into meaning too fast. The mirror doesn't look like the kind of thing that should rewrite history. If you saw it on the ground, you might mistake it for something from a high-end industrial workshop. Smooth, pale, carefully held, a circular surface that reflects the room back at itself without emotion. But the calm is exactly the point. A telescope isn't impressive because it's loud. It's impressive because it's disciplined. Every thrilling image you've ever seen from Hubble begins as a quiet, private event. A photon arriving, touching glass, changing direction, obeying geometry. You follow that photon because following it is soothing. It starts far away. So far the word far feels lazy. Maybe it left a star that was still forming when Earth was busy being a molten mess with no opinions. Maybe it left a galaxy when our ancestors were learning the radical new concept of not sleeping directly on rocks. It travels for ages through cold emptiness, never speeding up, never slowing down, never getting lost, because light doesn't need a map. It just goes. Then it reaches Hubble, and it meets the first mirror, Hubble's primary mirror, curved with exquisite intent. That curve is not decorative. It's a decision. It's the difference between light scattering and light gathering, between a vague glow and a sharp point. The mirror sends the photon toward a second mirror, the secondary, suspended out in front like a small companion. And then the light is directed back through a hole in the primary mirror into the instruments. Two bounces, a controlled corridor, and suddenly the universe is being funneled into something humans can measure. There's a gentle comfort in that predictability. Bounce, bounce, focus. It's like watching a perfectly practiced routine. No drama, no improvisation, just a smooth flow from one step to the next. If your mind likes to overcomplicate everything, it's a quiet reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing is a clean path. Hubble's optical design is built for clarity over a wide field, which is a fancy way of saying it's made to keep stars from turning into weird smears near the edge of the picture. The light has to behave not only at the center, where it's easiest, but across the whole view. That requires curves that are not just kind of right, but right in a way that makes your stomach unclench when you think about it. Because when you're trying to bring faint, ancient light to a sharp focus, you don't get to be casual. And that's where the relaxing part sneaks in. The mirror was polished with an almost meditative level of care. Polishing in this context isn't someone with a cloth going in little circles like they're cleaning fingerprints off a phone screen. It's a slow, controlled shaping process, measured again and again, refined until the surface is smooth at a scale so tiny it's almost rude. You're dealing with wavelengths of light, thin, delicate, so the mirror's surface has to be smooth compared to that. If the surface has ripples, light doesn't focus cleanly. It scatters. It blurs. The universe turns back into soup. So the mirror becomes a lesson in patience. Not the motivational poster kind of patience. The kind where you do the same careful act repeatedly, and you don't rush, because rushing would literally break the result. The mirror is a physical embodiment of slow down and do it right, except without the annoying person at work who says that while still sending emails at 1 a.m. You can also appreciate how Hubble makes use of light beyond what your eyes can see. Visible light is only a thin slice of what's out there. Hubble's instruments are designed to catch ultraviolet and near-infrared as well, each one revealing a different layer of reality. Ultraviolet can show hot young stars and energetic processes. Infrared can slip through dust and reveal cooler, hidden structures. It's like the universe has multiple voices, and Hubble is polite enough to listen to more than one. Listening is the key word. Hubble isn't shining anything at the universe. It's not pinging space like a cosmic sonar and waiting for an echo. It's receiving. It's letting the universe speak in whatever faint language it uses, and translating that language into something you can hold in your head. That translation isn't automatic. It's built on precision. Hubble's ability to point and hold its gaze is just as important as the mirror itself. A perfect mirror is useless if you can't keep the telescope steady long enough to collect light. So Hubble has fine guidance systems that lock onto guide stars, using them as steady anchors. It watches these reference stars and makes constant tiny corrections, so small they feel like whispers. The telescope's stare becomes a kind of controlled stillness, an intentional quiet that can last for a long time. It's hard not to find that calming. Most of the time, stillness is treated like laziness. Hubble turns stillness into a superpower. It sits there, locked in, gathering faint light until it becomes an image, until it becomes data, until it becomes discovery. And because you're thinking about the mirror, you start noticing the mirror as a symbol, not just a component. A mirror doesn't generate beauty. It reveals it. It doesn't add, it redirects. It takes what arrives and shapes it into clarity. That's a relaxing metaphor to carry into the night. You don't have to create something brand new right now. You can receive what's already here, breath, warmth, quiet, and let it settle into focus. There's also something human and tender about the fact that Hubble's optics were built by people who knew they wouldn't be there in orbit to babysit it. They had to trust their work. They had to trust the math, the measurements, the craftsmanship. That kind of trust doesn't happen in a hurry. It happens through repetition, measuring, checking, polishing, checking again, until the work becomes calm enough to stand on its own. And still, even in that calm, there's a tiny tremor of reality that makes the story more comforting, not less. Precision is fragile. Not fragile as in breaks easily, but fragile as in depends on details you can't always see. A mirror can be almost perfect and still be slightly wrong in a way that matters. The difference between stunning clarity and soft disappointment can be microscopic, the kind of mistake that wouldn't ruin a normal mirror in your bathroom, but would absolutely matter to a telescope meant to read the universe like fine print. That idea can feel oddly reassuring, because if something is carefully made as Hubble can carry the risk of tiny error, then your own small imperfections don't have to feel like personal failure. They can be part of the story. Sometimes the most meaningful progress comes not from being flawless, but from noticing a flaw and responding to it with intelligence instead of shame. You don't need the whole drama yet. No rushing ahead. The mirror at this point is still a promise, still a serene object waiting to do what it was designed to do. You can imagine it in that early phase, newly in orbit, temperature stabilized, systems humming quietly, and then the first starlight arriving in earnest. The mirror receives it like a patient lake receiving moonlight. The secondary mirror returns it. The instruments accept it. Bits turn into signals. Signals become images. And those images, before anyone even sees them, are just arrangements of photons. Tiny arrivals. A gentle rain of ancient light onto a surface polished by human patience. You can feel a kind of reverence for the simplicity of the process. No magic spells. No cosmic secrets whispered directly into an astronaut's ear. Just light and glass and geometry and time. A slow accumulation that turns the unreachable into something almost intimate. Even the outside of Hubble plays into that intimacy. The insulation you imagined earlier, the crinkly, foil-like layers, acts like a quiet wrapper around this delicate interior. It's funny in a soft way. One of the most important scientific instruments ever built is basically wearing an extremely expensive space blanket. The universe is grand, and the solutions are sometimes wonderfully humble. As Hubble keeps circling sunlight and shadow, sliding across its body, the mirror inside stays devoted to its one job, shaping light into clarity. And the closer you stay to that idea, the more you sense the next beat approaching with inevitability. Because when a mirror is made this carefully, when the expectations are this high, the first moment of seeing isn't just a technical milestone. It's emotional. It's the moment you find out whether the universe will come into focus the way you hoped, or whether the tiniest hidden detail will ask everyone involved to practice a different kind of patience. The first images arrive the way you expect miracles to arrive in real life. Quietly, through a screen, in a room where someone's coffee has gone cold because nobody wants to blink. There's no choir, no cosmic drum roll, just light that has finally been caught and turned into something you can look at. And for a second, you feel that gentle lift in your chest, that soft certainty that the universe is about to become clearer. Then you notice it. The stars don't quite look like stars. They look dreamy, and not in a deliberate, aesthetic way. More like you forgot your glasses and tried to pretend you didn't. There's a softness around bright points, a halo where there should be a crisp edge. You can almost hear the collective, careful silence in the rooms where people are seeing these early results, because scientists are trained to be excited quietly. But this is different. This is the kind of quiet where everyone is doing math in their head while trying not to panic out loud. It's a strangely comforting moment once you stop thinking of it as a disaster, because this is where Hubble becomes more human, not in the sentimental sense, but in the practical sense. Something can be built with extraordinary patience, launched with extraordinary care, placed gently into orbit like a priceless instrument, and still be imperfect in a way that matters. The issue has a calm, technical name that feels almost too polite for the amount of emotion it caused: spherical aberration. The mirror's curve is just slightly off. Not off by you can see it from across the room amount. Off by a tiny amount, microscopic, small enough that you could hide it under the thickness of a human hair and still have room to spare. But in optics, tiny errors don't stay tiny. They grow in a blur. They spread light where it shouldn't go. They take sharp starlight and smear it into something soft and disappointing. And you can appreciate the unfairness of that, the way you appreciate the unfairness of a single grain of sand in a perfectly good shoe. It's absurd. Everything else can be right, and one invisible detail can still demand attention. For a moment, it must have felt like the universe itself was playing a joke. Humans build a telescope to see clearly, place it above the atmosphere to escape blur, and then discover blur inside the telescope. It's almost comedic, the kind of comedy that lands only after you've stopped wanting to scream into a pillow. But Hubble's story is relaxing because of what happens next, not the blur itself. Though even that has a strange softness to it, like the universe insisting you learn patience the hard way. The relaxing part is the response. No frantic thrashing, no dramatic collapse. No, well, I guess that's it. Pack it up, everyone go home. Just a slow pivot into problem solving. Because scientists and engineers, at their best, are professional listeners. They don't just see an image and react. They measure, they compare, they test. They ask what the light is doing and why. They look at the way a bright star spreads on the detector. They examine patterns. They use models. They treat the blur like a message written in a language they can decode. And while the internet of today would have turned this into an endless loop of hot takes, Hubble's early era had a different tempo. News traveled slower. Criticism still arrived. Oh, it arrived, but the work of understanding wasn't shaped by the same constant digital shouting. It was shaped by focus, by people sitting with a problem long enough to make it reveal itself. You can imagine the mood, disappointment held gently, like something fragile. Not denial, not spin, just a quiet acceptance that the first job is to understand the truth. The mirror isn't focusing light the way it should. The halo around stars is real. The data tells you so. The universe isn't blurry. The telescope is. And here's one of the most soothing details. Even with the flaw, Hubble was still useful. Not ideal, not living up to the dream, but useful. Some instruments were less affected. Some kinds of observations could still be done. The telescope wasn't dead. It was just wearing the wrong prescription. That's where the most comforting metaphor appears, as naturally as a yawn. Because the fix for spherical aberration isn't mysterious. You don't have to rebuild the whole telescope. You don't have to drag it back down to Earth. You correct the light path. You add optics that counteract the error, like glasses counteract imperfect eyes. You take the flawed wavefront and bend it back into shape. That idea is gentle. Problems aren't always solved by destruction and replacement. Sometimes they're solved by correction, small, precise adjustments that let the larger thing keep being itself. So the teams on the ground begin planning the solution with the calm stubbornness of people who refuse to let one mistake define the whole mission. They already designed Hubble to be serviceable, which is another quietly brilliant fact. From the beginning, it wasn't meant to be a sealed, untouchable relic. It was built like a ship that could be repaired, upgraded, visited again. That design choice, serviceability, turns what could have been a tragedy into a challenge. It turns despair into a schedule. And the schedule matters because Hubble lives in that steady orbit you've been riding in your mind. It keeps circling sunlight and shadow, trading places, the mirror inside continuing to gather light. Even if the focus isn't perfect yet. The telescope doesn't get embarrassed. It doesn't sulk. It just keeps working with what it has. On Earth, the people working on it do what focus humans do when they're given a hard problem and a deadline. They get methodical. They refine their diagnosis. They confirm the exact shape of the aberration. They calculate how to correct it. They design corrective optics with extreme precision. Because you can't fix a microscopic error with a casual estimate. The correction has to be just as exact as the original intention. You can feel the steadiness of that process. It's almost hypnotic. Measure, model, design, test, repeat. The same kind of repetition that makes Hubble's orbit soothing now becomes the rhythm of human response. People turning disappointment into action, through calm iteration. And there's a quiet kind of humility in the way the flaw came to be. The mirror wasn't shaped by carelessness. It was shaped by a process that depended on an instrument, testing equipment used to guide the polishing. The polishing itself followed the readings faithfully. The tragedy is that the instrument used to verify the curve was slightly misconfigured. The workers did what the tool told them to do. The mirror became exquisitely wrong in a very specific way. If you've ever followed instructions perfectly and still ended up in a mess, you probably feel seen right now. It's the most human kind of mistake. Trusting a measurement that's almost correct and learning too late that almost is not the same as enough. But the story stays soothing because it doesn't linger in blame. The response is forward-facing. The teams don't treat the mirror like an embarrassment. They treat it like a reality. And reality, once accepted, becomes workable. They plan two complementary paths toward clarity. One is a set of corrective optics that can be installed to adjust the light for multiple instruments, essentially a set of contact lenses for Hubble's internal vision. The other is replacing a major camera with a newer one designed with built-in correction, so it receives the flawed light and fixes it internally before turning it into images. That approach is both practical and quietly poetic. You don't pretend the flaw isn't there. You build the correction into the way you see. And while all this is being designed and tested on Earth, Hubble continues to gather the universe in its imperfect way. You can imagine it taking a picture of a star cluster and seeing the softness, the halo, and not caring. You can imagine the engineers on the ground looking at those images like a doctor looking at symptoms, not judging, just diagnosing. The blur becomes a guide. The flaw leaves a fingerprint, and that fingerprint tells them exactly how to craft the cure. It's hard not to find that calming, the way a complex problem becomes less scary when it has a pattern. A pattern means there's structure. Structure means you can respond with precision rather than emotion. So the plan forms quietly, inevitably. The telescope will be visited. The correction will be brought. The blur will not be the ending of this story. It will be the turn that makes a story stronger. Because a telescope that succeeds without trouble is impressive. A telescope that stumbles and then becomes sharper than anyone dared to hope is something else entirely. It becomes proof that patience can outlast disappointment. And as Hubble keeps circling above you, sunlight flashing on its skin, shadow cooling its edges, you can feel the whole mission hovering on the edge of a calm kind of suspense. Not the frantic suspense of an action movie. The steady suspense of craftsmanship, a problem identified, a solution designed, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Hubble stays in orbit, still faithful, still collecting light, carrying its tiny optical flaw like a temporary inconvenience rather than a fate. Down below, people prepare the fix with the same careful hands that polished the mirror in the first place. Hands guided now by clearer knowledge, sharper measurement, and the quiet determination to bring the universe into focus the way it was always meant to be seen. The plan doesn't feel like a plan so much as a promise that's finally earned its own footsteps. Down on Earth, the designs become hardware, the hardware becomes procedures, the procedures become muscle memory, and up above, Hubble keeps circling with its soft, stubborn blur, patient in a way that almost feels like it's daring you to be patient too. The telescope doesn't know it's famous. It just knows its next sunrise, its next shadow, its next quiet stare. And then, one day, the Earth sends visitors. You picture the Space Shuttle Endeavour lifting off in December of 1993, carrying the kind of cargo that has a weird emotional weight. Not just parts, but redemption. The rocket sound is all thunder and vibration again, but you're not held there for long because the real mood of this moment isn't roar. It's what happens after, when Endeavour reaches orbit and everything turns into slow motion, like the universe itself is telling the crew to move gently. In your mind, you're inside the shuttle's payload bay as the doors open and the scene changes from vehicle to floating workshop. Tool boxes, handrails, foot restraints, equipment carriers. Everything arranged with the careful logic of people who know that if a screwdriver drifts away, it won't land under the couch. It will keep going. Somewhere, forever, a very confused bolt will become a tiny satellite. Space is not forgiving about your clumsiness, which is kind of unfair considering humans are, by nature, slightly clumsy even on a good day. The approach to Hubble is its own quiet suspense. No engine roar you can hear, no cinematic swoops, just a measured closing of distance and a white cylinder growing larger against black. Hubble isn't tumbling. It's not calling for help. It's just there, like a patient waiting in a perfectly clean room. Endeavor lines up, and the robotic arm, this calm, jointed creature of metal, reaches out to capture the telescope. A gentle grip, a slow settle. Hubble is brought into the payload bay and held in place, the way you'd hold a delicate instrument before tuning it. You can almost feel the relief in that first secure moment. The patient is on the table. Then comes the part that always feels unreal, no matter how many times you've seen footage. The spacewalk. The hatch opens, and the astronaut doesn't step out so much as glide out, attached by a tether like an umbilical cord to the world of air and warmth. The suit is bulky, bright, and somehow tender-looking, like a walking life support system that decided to cosplay as a marshmallow. It's easy to forget, watching it, that every inch of that suit is doing serious work, keeping pressure, regulating temperature, filtering carbon dioxide, providing oxygen. The astronaut isn't just floating. They're living inside a carefully controlled bubble. You can hear the soundscape in your head, and it's oddly intimate. The steady breathing inside the helmet, the occasional crackle of radio, the soft thump of a gloved hand on a handrail. Space is silent, but the human inside the suit is not. Every inhale and exhale becomes a metronome. If you're lying in bed listening, it's almost hypnotic, breath, 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 like the calmest proof that life is happening. And the hands. The hands become the whole story. Gloves in a spacesuit are thick, pressurized, stubborn. They resist you. They don't want your fingers to bend. Every small movement takes effort, and every task that would be casual on Earth becomes a slow, deliberate ritual. You watch a gloved thumb and forefinger try to grasp a handle, and it's the gentlest kind of suspense. Will it click? Will it latch? Will the tool behave? There's no rushing. There can't be. Not because someone said take your time, but because physics and pressure already did. It's almost ASMR in motion, a hand reaching for a tether point, the slight pause while a latch is checked, the careful pull that seats a connector, the tiny bob of the astronaut's body reacting to the smallest push. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and in microgravity that means the astronaut moves like a slow dancer. Push and drift, pull and steady, touch and float back. You can feel how awareness expands out there. Every movement matters. Every tool is accounted for. Every step is a slow agreement between body and environment. The work begins with the kind of calm seriousness that doesn't need dramatic music. Panels are opened. Latches are released. Protective doors swing back. Hubble's interior bays reveal themselves. Compartments designed specifically so astronauts can replace pieces like you'd replace a drawer in a cabinet. Except the cabinet is orbiting Earth, and the drawer costs more than your entire hometown. No pressure. One of the most soothing parts is realizing how much of the mission is built around making the work possible. Handrails everywhere. Foot restraints that lock an astronaut in place, so they can apply torque without drifting away. Tools designed to be used by a person wearing gloves that feel like boxing gloves filled with air. Space-rated fasteners that won't strip easily, because in orbit you don't get a do-over trip to the hardware store. And then comes the moment you've been waiting for since that first soft blur, the correction. A major camera is removed, handled like it's made of glass, even though it's solid engineering. The old wide field/planetary camera is pulled out of its slot with slow, careful control. There's something quietly emotional about that exchange, even if you're not the sentimental type. The old camera did its best with the flawed light it received. It wasn't a villain. It was just the first draft. Now it's being replaced by something built to forgive the mirror's tiny mistake. Wide Field and Planetary Camera 2 goes in. WFPC-2, designed with its own corrective optics so that the images it produces will be sharp. It's like giving the telescope a new pair of eyes that already know how to compensate. The camera slides into place. Connectors are secured. Latches close. All the gestures are slow and controlled. And the pace itself feels like a lullaby made of competence. But the camera isn't enough because Hubble isn't just a camera. It's an observatory with multiple instruments, each one hungry for precise light. So the mission also brings something that feels almost comically literal, a corrective optics package that sits inside the telescope and adjusts the light for other instruments. COSTAR, the Corrective Optics Space Telescope Axial Replacement, goes in like a secret set of mirrors hidden inside a cabinet. It's described as about the size of a phone booth, which is a charmingly outdated reference that somehow makes it feel even more comforting, like space history has its own little vintage vocabulary. To make room, an instrument is removed from an axial bay. A new unit is installed. Inside COSTAR are carefully shaped mirrors positioned to intercept the incoming light and correct it before it reaches the instruments that need it. The elegance of the fix is almost relaxing in itself. Nobody tries to pretend the main mirror is suddenly perfect. They acknowledge the flaw and shape the light anyway. The universe doesn't care about your pride, so the solution doesn't either. And while all this is happening, other work gets done, because if you're going to open up a space telescope, you don't waste the opportunity. Gyroscopes are replaced to keep pointing stable. Components that manage electrical power are swapped out. Magnetometers are handled. The solar arrays, those long wings that gather sunlight, are replaced too, because the originals had issues that could introduce tiny vibrations, especially as the telescope warmed and cooled through those day-night transitions you've been feeling. Even the wings get upgraded so Hubble can hold still more quietly, like tightening the strings on an instrument so it stops buzzing. The whole scene is both grand and oddly domestic. On the scale of human history, this is heroic. On the scale of the actions, it's careful maintenance. Unfasten, remove, store, install, secure, verify. Each step is repeated, checked, confirmed. The astronaut doesn't just twist a bolt. They confirm the tool is seated, confirm the bolt turns properly, confirm the latch is secure, confirm the tether is still attached. The mission is built out of tiny, correct moments. You can almost feel the strain in the hands through the gloves, the slow fatigue of fighting pressurized stiffness, the concentration required to do fine work while your body floats and your visor reflects sunlight. It's the quiet kind of effort that doesn't look dramatic but counts for everything. A hand holds a handle, a wrist rotates, a latch clicks, a connector seats with a gentle push. The astronaut pauses, breath audible, then moves to the next task with the patience of someone who knows that fast is not a virtue out here. In the background is always Earth, rolling beneath, blue and white and indifferent to the mission's intensity. Clouds curl over oceans. Nightside city lights glitter for a moment, then slide away. The Earth turns while humans repair their eye in space, and that contrast makes the whole thing feel calmer, not more stressful. The planet is not holding its breath. It's spinning. The universe is not judging. It's waiting. When the spacewalks stack up, hours and hours of this slow-motion precision, you start to feel the bigger truth settling in. This is what saving something looks like. Not a single dramatic leap, but a sequence of gentle, correct actions. A telescope can be redeemed by hands that move carefully. A blurry dream can be sharpened by patience that doesn't get offended by reality. Eventually, the work closes up. Panels return to place. Tools are stowed. The astronauts retreat back toward the shuttle like divers returning to a boat, leaving the ocean behind them. Hubble is released from the robotic arm, set free again into its orbit. The telescope drifts away from Endeavour with the calm of something that has been quietly improved, not transformed into something else, just brought closer to what it was always meant to be. And the most relaxing part is that nothing about the universe changes in that moment. Only the way Hubble can meet it. The photons still travel. The galaxies still glow. The nebulae still cradle newborn stars. The difference is that the telescope is ready to receive the light with new clarity, and the people on Earth are about to see what patience looks like when it pays off. Hubble slips into shadow again, and you can almost feel it settling into its rhythm, as if it's testing its new calm. The orbit continues. The breathing of day and night continues. And somewhere inside that white cylinder, corrected optics wait for the next wave of ancient light to arrive, ready to turn it into something sharp enough to make the mind go quiet. The first corrected light feels like a sigh you didn't realize you were holding. Not because the universe suddenly becomes louder, but because the blur finally stops pretending it's a style choice. Stars tighten into points. Edges behave. The telescope's attention becomes clean again, the way your vision feels when you put on the right glasses and the world quietly snaps into place without making a big deal about it. Hubble slips along its orbit with that expensive space blanket wrapped around it, day and night flipping like pages, and the instruments inside begin doing what they were always meant to do: receive faintness without flinching. And that's when the mood of the whole mission shifts from "we fixed it" to something deeper and more patient. Because fixing Hubble wasn't the climax. It was the moment the story finally got permission to be slow. You can feel that slowness in the way the telescope chooses what to look at next. Big, bright targets are tempting, things that shout their presence with color and shape. But Hubble, at its most mesmerizing, is not a chaser of the obvious. It's an expert in staying with what looks like nothing until nothing turns into everything. A patch of sky is selected, one that, to your eyes, would look empty. Not empty like there's literally nothing there, because space doesn't do literal nothing. Empty like no bright stars, no flashing nebulae, no obvious galaxies waving their arms for attention. Just a quiet piece of darkness, a place you'd normally ignore. The kind of place your brain labels as blank and moves on from. And Hubble doesn't move on. It points itself with that slow, precise confidence you've been feeling since the servicing mission. The gentle corrections, the guide stars held like anchors, the body of the telescope holding still in a way that feels almost meditative. It locks in. It begins collecting light. Not for a quick snapshot, for a long time. Long exposure is such a calm concept when you let it be. It's the opposite of a jump scare. It's the universe being allowed to speak in a whisper, and Hubble being polite enough to listen long enough to hear it. A single short exposure might show only a few faint smudges, barely distinguishable from the background. But Hubble is built for patience, so patience becomes the method. The telescope gathers light the way you gather calm when you stop checking the clock. One quiet minute stacking on another, adding up into something you can actually feel. This is where the deep field idea becomes almost hypnotic. The telescope is staring at what looks like a blank wall of night. And the longer it stares, the more that wall turns out to be a door. You can imagine the photons arriving like tiny, slow snowflakes. Except they aren't slow, they're moving at light speed, but in your mind they can drift because the point is gentleness. Each photon hits the mirror, bounces through that corrected path, and lands on a detector. One by one, a faint trickle, so faint that if Hubble blinked, if it looked away too soon, you'd never know they were there. But it doesn't blink. It stays. Meanwhile, the Earth keeps rolling beneath, and Hubble's orbit keeps forcing interruptions. The telescope can't stare continuously without breaks. It passes into daylight. It passes into shadow. The target shifts behind Earth for a moment. It has to pause, then return. That stop-and-start rhythm could feel frustrating if you expected instant results. But it's part of the soothing logic. The universe doesn't care if you take your time. The light has been traveling for ages. It can wait through a few orbital passes. Over many orbits, the exposures stack. They're combined. Noise is teased apart from signal with careful processing. Patterns emerge. At first, it's just a subtle grain of brightness that makes you wonder if you're imagining it. Then the faintness gains shape. Smudges appear where there was nothing. More smudges. Then smudges with structure, spirals, ellipticals, tiny elongated streaks. A whole population of galaxies rising out of the dark like a city appearing in fog as you drive closer. And if you pause on that mental image, it can do something really kind to your nervous system. Because the deep field is proof that emptiness is often just detail you haven't given enough time to see. Hubble's deep field became famous for this very reason. It's not famous because it pointed at the biggest, brightest object. It's famous because it pointed at a place that didn't look like anything special and refused to look away. It invested time in nothing, and nothing turned into thousands of galaxies. Thousands. In a patch of sky so small you could cover it with a grain of sand held at arm's length. That scale is soothing in a strange way. Your problems might feel huge right now, pressed close to your face like that grain of sand. But when you pull your hand back, when you widen the view, everything changes. The deep field is a widening of view made literal. It takes a tiny patch and reveals that the universe is full even where it seems empty. There's a gentle sarcasm in how humbling it is. Humans spent centuries arguing about whether the Milky Way was basically the whole universe. And then Hubble looks at a blank patch and goes, in its quiet mechanical way, "Oh, you thought that was empty? That's cute." It doesn't say it out loud, of course. It just shows you. No lecture, just evidence. And the evidence doesn't come as a single dramatic reveal. It comes as accumulation. The deep field is not a firework. It's a slow sunrise. It teaches you that wonder can be built gradually without any single moment needing to carry the whole emotional weight. That's why it's so perfect for sleep. It doesn't yank you awake. It draws you in with quiet persistence, like a story that gets better the longer you stay with it. You can also feel the bravery hidden inside the calm. Pointing a major space telescope at a seemingly blank spot wasn't an obvious choice. Telescope time is precious. There are always bright, popular targets begging for attention. Choosing a dark patch is like choosing to sit in silence when everyone else is chasing noise. It's a commitment to the idea that the universe will reward patience, even if the patience looks boring at first. And it did. That blank patch wasn't blank. It was crowded with galaxies at different distances, different shapes, different stages of development. Some are close enough to show recognizable structure. Some are so faint and small that they barely rise above the background. Each one is a whole system of stars, dust, gas, probably planets, probably stories. When you let yourself absorb that, your mind has two options. Either it gets overwhelmed or it gets oddly peaceful. The peaceful version happens when you stop trying to hold it all at once. You don't need to imagine every galaxy as a full, detailed place with billions of suns. You can just accept the pattern. Fullness. A quiet, sprawling fullness that doesn't require you to do anything about it. The universe is abundant without asking you to keep up. Hubble's deep field work went further over time. Longer observations, deeper exposures, fainter galaxies. Each new deep field is like taking the same calming breath, but longer, slower, more generous. The deeper it looked, the more it found. Not because the telescope got more aggressive, but because it got more patient. The same motion, the same stillness, the same receiving, just extended. That extension has a sleepy beauty to it. You can imagine the telescope in orbit, returning to the same tiny coordinate again and again, like revisiting the same quiet thought until it reveals a hidden layer. Most thoughts don't deserve that kind of attention. Worries certainly don't. But the deep field shows that some kinds of attention are nourishing. They uncover wonder. They expand the mind without tightening it. And when those images finally appeared, when the nothing became a tapestry, you can picture the human reaction not as shouting, but as a stunned hush. The kind of hush you get when you open a book expecting a simple story and find a whole world instead. The deep field is the universe handing you proof that your imagination has been underestimating reality. It also changes the feeling of darkness itself. Darkness stops being a blank void and becomes a canvas full of faint ink. The night sky isn't empty, it's quiet. It's not nothing, it's waiting. That's a comforting upgrade for anyone who lies in bed staring at a ceiling and thinking the dark is just a container for worries. The deep field suggests the dark is full of things you simply haven't stared at long enough to recognize. You can let that thought soften you. The night around you is not hostile. It's spacious. It holds you the way space holds Hubble, without gripping, without demanding, just allowing you to float in your own small orbit of breath and warmth. And Hubble's patience has another gentle lesson. It doesn't need certainty to begin. It doesn't need to know exactly what it will find in that blank patch. It commits to the looking anyway. That kind of commitment, curiosity without guaranteed reward, is rare and calm and strong. It's the opposite of doom thinking, where you imagine outcomes before they happen and tire yourself out in advance. The deep field is the practice of letting reality reveal itself on its own schedule. Hubble holds its gaze. Light accumulates. The void fills with galaxies. The story expands without raising its voice. And you stay with it because the longer you stay, the more the universe rewards you, quietly, steadily, until even your own thoughts begin to feel less like clutter and more like distant lights, scattered, harmless, and beautifully far away. That tapestry of galaxies you've been holding in your mind has a funny secret. Before it becomes the image you remember, it starts out as something much quieter and far less glamorous. At first, it's mostly numbers, tiny counts of photons, a grayscale whisper recorded by a detector that doesn't care about romance, only about whether light arrived and how much of it did. The wonder comes later when humans decide how to translate that whisper into something your eyes can understand without a physics degree and a very strong cup of coffee. This is where the colors of Hubble begin. Colors that aren't really colors, at least not in the simple, everyday sense. Because Hubble isn't a camera the way your phone is a camera. Your phone tries to mimic what your eyes would see if you were standing there. Hubble is more like a collector of specific slices of light, each slice taken through a filter like a calm, deliberate sip from a giant cosmic sampler. A filter is basically a gate. It lets some wavelengths in and blocks others. If you imagine light as a long piano keyboard, a filter can choose a small range of notes and ignore the rest. Hubble takes an exposure through one filter, then another, and each one becomes its own quiet layer, its own grayscale map of how bright is this object in this particular band of light. So the deep field you were just drifting through wasn't captured as a single, perfect picture. It was built layer by layer, out of multiple exposures. Each exposure is like listening to the same piece of music, but focusing on a different instrument each time. First, you listen for the violins, then the cello, then the soft percussion that you didn't notice before. You're not changing the song, you're choosing what to notice. And because Hubble listens beyond the limits of human eyes, some of those instruments are invisible to you. Ultraviolet, near-infrared, even within visible light, narrow slices that isolate specific emission lines from glowing gas. Hubble gathers them anyway, because the universe doesn't only speak in the colors you grew up naming with crayons. Here's the soothing part. Turning those layers into an image is an act of translation, not deception. People sometimes say false color, like it's a trick, like someone is painting space to make it prettier. But most of the time, it's closer to subtitles for light. You're being shown information your eyes can't naturally see, mapped into a visible palette so your brain can grasp the structure. If you've ever looked at a weather radar map, you already understand the idea. Rain isn't actually neon green and bright red, but the colors help you understand intensity and movement in a way that raw numbers wouldn't. Hubble does something similar, only instead of rain, it's ancient starlight and glowing clouds and galaxies so far away they feel like they belong to a different kind of time. The camera records a grayscale image for each filter. Then, when the images are combined, colors are assigned. Sometimes the colors are chosen to match what your eyes would roughly perceive if you could see those wavelengths, what people call natural color. Other times, the colors are chosen to separate features clearly, so different kinds of gas or different temperatures stand out from each other. That's where you get those famous nebula images where one region glows blue, another gold, another deep red, because different elements and processes are being given their own voice. There's a gentle sarcasm hiding here too, because humans love to argue about what's real. Is that what it really looks like, they ask, as if their own eyes are some kind of cosmic truth machine. Your eyes are amazing, sure, but they're picky. They ignore most of the electromagnetic spectrum, and they get easily fooled by brightness, contrast, and context. They're a biological compromise built for survival on Earth, not for reading the universe like a library. Hubble is different. It doesn't have nostalgia for sunsets. It has detectors, sensors that convert incoming photons into electrical signals. It counts. It measures. It stores. It's almost comically honest. Then humans, trying to be kind to other humans, take those honest measurements and turn them into images that feel intuitive. That kindness matters, because the images are not just for scientists. They're for you, lying in bed, letting the night settle in your bones, needing something bigger than your inbox to think about. Hubble's colors are a bridge between raw data and human wonder. Without that bridge, the universe would still be beautiful, but it would be harder to hold. Think about how calming it is to realize that the beauty is still anchored in reality. Those colors aren't random paint. They're meaning. They're a visual code that says here is hot gas. Here is cooler dust. Here is a region where stars are being born. Here is a structure you would miss if you only looked in one band. And if you stay with that, you start to feel the way color becomes a tool for attention. Your mind is already doing this all the time. It highlights certain thoughts, dims others, assigns emotional colors to memories without asking your permission. Hubble's method is more disciplined. It separates, labels, reveals. It doesn't let everything blur into one overwhelming smear. It says, one layer at a time. You might find it comforting that Hubble, even after all its upgrades and legendary status, still depends on very simple logic. Collect photons, sort them by wavelength, build a picture. There's no shortcut where it just magically knows what something is. It has to look, measure, and then look again through a different filter. That repeated attention is how the universe becomes legible. This is also where you can feel the telescope's patience becoming almost personal. It isn't just waiting for faint galaxies to appear. It's waiting long enough in each filter to gather a clean signal. Some wavelengths are stingy. Ultraviolet light is often weaker by the time it reaches us, and Earth's atmosphere blocks much of it, which is part of why Hubble being above the atmosphere matters so much. Near-infrared can reveal things hidden behind dust, but it has its own challenges. Every band has its own personality, its own kind of quiet. So Hubble listens in multiple voices, then hands those voices to people who arrange them into a chord you can see. And that chord is where magnificence sneaks up on you. Because color, when used thoughtfully, makes the universe feel structured rather than chaotic. A nebula isn't just a pretty cloud. It's layers of gas energized by radiation, shaped by winds, carved by gravity, lit by young stars. A galaxy isn't just a smudge. It's spirals and dust lanes and star-forming regions and older stellar populations, all revealed by how they glow in different wavelengths. Color is how you see the architecture. It's also how you feel the depth. In the deep field, different galaxies show different colors partly because of what's inside them. Young blue stars versus older red stars, but also because of distance and the stretching of light as the universe expands. Light traveling across cosmic distances gets stretched toward longer wavelengths. So the farthest galaxies can look redder, not because they're red objects, but because their light has been traveling through an expanding universe for so long that the color shifts. That's not just a technical detail. It's a gentle reminder that time leaves fingerprints you can see. You can let that thought become a soft weight on your eyelids. Distance turns into color. Time turns into hue. The universe quietly marks its history in the light that arrives. And the act of assigning colors becomes a kind of storytelling that stays faithful to the facts. It's not fiction. It's interpretation in the same way music is interpretation. A sheet of notes isn't the same as the sound of a performance, but the performance could be true to the notes while still being shaped for human ears. Hubble's images are like that, true to the measurements, shaped for human eyes, arranged so your brain can sense the patterns without strain. That's why, when you see a Hubble image that looks almost too perfect, it can still be honest. The processing steps, aligning frames, removing noise, correcting for instrument quirks, balancing brightness, are the equivalent of cleaning a window so you could see through it. The universe doesn't become less real because you wipe the smudges off the glass. If anything, it becomes more accessible. And accessibility is calming. Confusion tires you out. Clarity lets you rest. Hubble's colors, whether natural or mapped, are a form of clarity. They say, here is the shape. Here is the boundary. Here is the glow. Here is the contrast between hot and cold, between dust and starlight, between nearer and farther. You can also feel, if you listen closely, how these colors keep the wonder from going stale. A grayscale universe can be beautiful, but color adds layers your mind can wander through. It gives you paths. Follow the blue regions, then the red filaments, then the golden haze. It turns the sky into a landscape you can travel without moving. And the best part is that Hubble doesn't care whether you use those colors for science or for sleep. It doesn't care if you're analyzing star formation rates or simply letting the image wash over you like a slow tide. The photons arrived either way. The telescope received them either way. The universe offered its whisper, and the translation brought it to you. So you stay with the idea of color as a gentle code, a map made from light. You imagine the telescope in its orbit, wrapped in its expensive space blanket, collecting one layer after another. Ultraviolet, visible near infrared, building an image the way night builds a dream. Quietly, piece by piece, until the scene feels complete. And as those colors settle in your mind, you can feel the story drifting toward a softer, more intimate kind of beauty. Clouds of gas and dust, star nurseries glowing like lanterns in the dark. Places where stars are born with no urgency at all, because the universe has never been in a hurry. Those colors linger like afterimages on the inside of your eyelids, and they start to arrange themselves into places rather than pictures. Not just a photo of a nebula, but a location with texture and depth, a region of space where matter gathers and light makes soft decisions about what to reveal. You find yourself drifting toward the kind of scenes Hubble made iconic. Nebulae that look like clouds you could sink your hands into, except they're made of gas so thin you'd call it empty if it weren't glowing. A nebula is, at its core, a calm contradiction. It's a cloud, but not like weather. There's no wind in the usual sense, no billowing air pressing against itself. The density is so low that if you try to breathe it, you'd have bigger problems than a stuffy nose. And yet, these clouds are the nurseries of stars. Out of this faintness comes brightness. Out of this quiet comes fusion. The universe takes a mist and eventually produces suns. If you want a relaxing fact, it's this: star formation is not rushed. It doesn't happen on a schedule that cares about your impatience. Gravity takes its time. Gas gathers slowly. Regions cool and compress. Bits of dust and molecules drift together. Not because they're ambitious, but because gravity is persistent. In a way, gravity is the ultimate slow worker. It never sleeps. It never hurries. It simply keeps pulling, and over long enough time, pulling becomes structure. Hubble shows you that process by revealing the architecture inside these clouds. Pillars, filaments, bubbles, shapes carved by radiation and stellar winds from young, hot stars. You can imagine a region where newborn stars flood their surroundings with ultraviolet light, energizing the gas so it glows. The brightest areas aren't always the densest. They're often the places being illuminated, excited, made visible by the energy pouring out of nearby stars. That's a gentle comfort too. Sometimes what looks most intense is simply what's being lit. The structure was there. The light just makes it readable. Hubble's images of nebulae can feel like bedtime scenery because they have both softness and sharpness. The clouds look velvety, almost like smoke caught in a slow current. But the stars embedded within them are pinpoints, crisp, steady, like they're stitched into the fabric. Your mind likes that balance. Too soft, and everything feels vague. Too sharp, and everything feels tense. Nebulae give you both, a place to rest your attention and a detail to keep it interested. Take the idea of the pillars of creation, for example. Those tall, finger-like structures in the Eagle Nebula that became one of Hubble's most famous looks. Even if you don't picture the exact image, you can picture the feeling. Towering columns of gas and dust, lit from the side, edges glowing, interiors dark and protective. It looks like a landscape, like cliffs in a strange canyon. But it's not solid. It's an illusion of solidity caused by dust blocking light. Those dark regions aren't stone. They're denser dust and gas hiding what's behind. And inside those dense regions, stars are forming. The pillars are not just pretty shapes, they're shelters. Gravity pulls material together in the densest pockets, and those pockets collapse, heating up until fusion ignites. That ignition is one of the most magnificent quiet events you can imagine. A star begins to exist, and it does so without fireworks you can hear, without any announcement, just a slow crossing of a threshold where pressure and temperature become enough. Hubble captures the evidence. Bright young stars that have already broken through their cocoons, jets of material from protostars, glowing ridges where radiation is eroding the clouds. It's like seeing a garden at night with a flashlight. Some areas flare into visibility, others remain shadowed, and you sense life happening even in the dark patches. The star nurseries Hubble reveals are also not tidy. They're messy in the way creativity is messy. Gas swirls, dust clumps, energetic stars carve cavities. Shock waves compress regions, triggering new bursts of formation. It's not a quiet, peaceful room. It's more like a calm storm, dynamic, active, but on timescales so long that the motion becomes a kind of stillness. That is a deeply sleep-friendly thought if you let it settle. Not everything needs to be still to be calm. A steady drift can be calm. A slow change can be calm. Even a place where stars are being born can feel calm if the pace is measured in tens of thousands or millions of years. The universe does intense things slowly, and that slowness makes them gentle. Hubble also shows you how dust behaves like a curtain. Dust isn't just a nuisance. It's part of the story. It blocks some wavelengths and lets others pass. That's why infrared observations are so powerful. They can slip through dust more easily, revealing stars that are hidden in visible light. So a nebula isn't one scene, it's layered. In visible light, you see glowing gas and dark dust lanes. In infrared, you see deeper into the nursery, like pulling back a curtain without touching it. There's a comforting parallel to your own mind here. Some layers are obvious, the thoughts that are loud and bright. Some layers are hidden behind dust, stress, fatigue, old memories, unresolved tension. Seeing deeper doesn't require force. Sometimes it just requires a different kind of light, a different angle, a different patience. Hubble doesn't tear the dust away. It observes in a wavelength that reveals what's behind. Gentle, respectful curiosity. And when Hubble shows you these nurseries, it also shows you that stars are not solitary in their beginnings. Many form in clusters. Birthplaces are crowded. It's like the universe favors community at the start. Stars form in groups, surrounded by siblings, in regions where one star's radiation can shape another star's surroundings. They're born into an environment that influences them immediately. That's oddly reassuring too. You didn't start alone either. No one does. Even if you feel lonely sometimes, your origin is connected. The universe itself forms bright things in clusters, in shared clouds, under shared gravity. The magnificence builds when you remember that these nebulae are not just faraway decorations. They are part of a cycle. Stars form from gas and dust. They live, they shine, they blow winds, they create heavier elements in their cores. Later, those elements get returned to space in various ways, enriching the next generation of clouds. The atoms in your body, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, were made in stars. Hubble's nebulae aren't just pretty clouds. They're the environments where future chemistry gets its start. You don't have to lean into the whole "we are stardust" thing like it's a motivational speech. You can keep it simple and calm. The universe recycles. It doesn't waste. It turns clouds into stars, stars into elements, elements into new clouds. That cycle is slow, steady, and bigger than anything you're worried about at midnight. Hubble's images make this cycle feel intimate because they show you the details. You see dust lanes like soft charcoal strokes. You see glowing edges where radiation is eating away at a cloud, sculpting it into curves. You see bright knots where stars are already shining through. And you begin to realize that beauty in the universe often comes from the edge, where light meets shadow, where gas meets radiation, where pressure meets collapse. Edges are where stories happen. Hubble is an edge watcher. There's also something deeply relaxing about the scale of these clouds. Some nebula structures span light years. A single pillar can be several light years long, meaning light, moving faster than anything else, still takes years to travel from one end to the other. Your brain can't truly picture that, not in a literal way, but it can feel it as spaciousness. Nebulae are wide, open places. They have room. They don't crowd you. They invite your attention to drift rather than focus sharply. So you let your attention drift across a nebula the way you might watch clouds on a lazy afternoon. Except these clouds are lit from within and carved by stars. Your thoughts slow down. The colors soften. The sharpness of the stars becomes a steady sprinkle of points, like salt on velvet. And in that calm, you can sense the next layer of grandeur approaching, because once you've floated through star nurseries, your mind is ready to pull back and see how those stars gather into larger structures. Galaxies, spirals, islands of light. Each one a deeper kind of time travel. For now, you stay a little longer in the nursery. You linger on the quiet fact that the universe makes its brightest engines out of faint clouds, and it does it without rushing, without noise, without needing you to watch. Hubble just shows you that the process is happening beautifully in the dark, so slow that it feels like stillness, so patient that it makes your own patience feel possible. You linger in that nursery haze for one more slow breath, and then your attention begins to rise, like you're backing away from a glowing campfire until you can see the whole valley around it. The clouds and pillars are still there, still making stars the way the universe has always made stars, but you start noticing what those newborn lights belong to once they grow up. They don't stay scattered forever. Gravity gathers them into families, and those families become neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods become cities of stars, galaxies. The first calming thing about galaxies is that they're honest about time. You never see a galaxy as it is right now. You see it as it was when its light left. Light isn't instant. It's fast, so fast your brain tries to treat it like magic, but it still needs time to cross distance. So every Hubble image is a postcard mailed from the past, arriving late on purpose, carrying a timestamp written in the travel time of photons. If you look at a galaxy 10 million light years away, you're seeing light that started its trip 10 million years ago. If you look at one a billion light years away, you're seeing it as it was a billion years ago. And when Hubble looks deeper, those faint smudges in the deep fields you covered with a mental grain of sand, you're looking back so far that the numbers stop feeling like numbers and start feeling like a different kind of quiet. You're watching galaxies when the universe was younger, when structures were still settling into shapes, when everything was a little wilder, a little less polished. That's time travel with zero paradox and no annoying movie plot holes. No alternate timelines, no dramatic warnings, just the simple physics of distance. The universe does the traveling for you. You lie there in bed, and Hubble hands you postcards from epochs your body can't imagine. And it does it with the calm confidence of a machine that only speaks in light. You can feel how that changes the meaning of far. Far isn't just space. Far is time. The further you look, the earlier you're peaking. The sky becomes layered, like stacked sheets of translucent paper. Nearby galaxies are closer to now, showing mature spirals and well-formed disks, dust lanes that look like brushed charcoal. Farther galaxies look smaller, more irregular, like they're still deciding what kind of galaxy they want to be when they grow up. And the farther you go, the more the light shifts, stretched by the expansion of the universe. So those ancient galaxies often look redder, their original bluer light pulled in a longer wavelengths on its long ride to your eyes. Hubble makes this feel gentle rather than abstract, because you can actually see the difference. Nearby spirals look like they have manners. Arms curve gracefully. Dark lanes slice across bright cores. Star-forming regions glitter in clusters, like someone sprinkled sugar on velvet. You can almost imagine them rotating slowly, not because you can watch them move, but because the structure suggests motion the way a swirl suggests stirring. Then you slide your gaze outward in time, and the galaxies start to look like they've been through something. Shapes get messy, eh? Disks look disturbed. You see pairs tugging on each other, tidal tails flung out like ribbons, bright knots where gas has been compressed into rapid star formation. Collisions are common in the young universe, not because galaxies are reckless, but because everything was closer together. Gravity pulls and pulls, and when two galaxies meet, they don't crash like cars. They interpenetrate. Stars mostly pass by each other with enormous distances between them, but the gas clouds slam, compress, ignite, and the whole system reshapes over time into something new. It's strangely soothing to realize that even on the scale of galaxies, change doesn't happen in a snap. A merger takes hundreds of millions of years. It's the slowest, grandest dance imaginable. If you could watch it in real time, it would look almost still. Hubble shows you frozen frames of these dances at different stages, like a photo album of cosmic choreography. One frame shows two spirals approaching. Another shows them tangled. Another shows the aftermath, a calmer, rounder galaxy forming from the stirred-up chaos. So galaxies become a lesson in patience too. Even transformation can be slow and gentle when the timescale is big enough. You might notice how Hubble's view makes galaxies feel like islands. They sit in the black sea of space, self-contained, full of stars and dust and history. An island of light is a comforting image. It suggests boundaries, structure, a place with its own internal weather. And you can drift from island to island without leaving your pillow. The time travel feeling deepens when you remember that galaxies evolve. The Milky Way you live in today didn't always look like this. It grew by gathering smaller galaxies, by accreting gas, by forming stars, by recycling material through generations of stellar lives. When Hubble looks back at younger galaxies, you're seeing versions of the universe that resemble childhood photos. Less refined, more chaotic, full of new growth. It's almost tender, the way it makes the whole cosmos feel like something that matured rather than something that appeared fully formed. Hubble helped show that many distant galaxies are smaller and clumpier than nearby ones, with bright star-forming clumps that make them look like they're sprinkled with lanterns. That clumpiness isn't a flaw in the image. It's the universe still building. Gas is pouring into galaxies, stars are forming rapidly, and structures are still settling into the graceful spirals you're used to seeing in posters. And sometimes the universe gives you help in the calmest way possible. It turns itself into a magnifying glass. Massive galaxy clusters bend the path of light from galaxies behind them, stretching it into arcs and rings and making the background brighter than it ought to be. Hubble catches those arcs like luminous brushstrokes on black canvas. It's not a special effect. It's geometry, and it lets you peek even farther back than the telescope's mirror size alone would normally allow. Those warped arcs are also a reminder that a single view can contain multiple ages at once. You're seeing the foreground cluster at one moment in time, and behind it a galaxy even farther back, whose light took a longer route and got bent along the way. The line of sight becomes a hallway of history, layered and quiet, and Hubble holds that hallway steady enough for you to walk down it with your imagination. You hover in one view, a spiral galaxy relatively nearby, crisp arms and dust lanes, bright knots of young stars. Then you drift outward to a more distant patch where galaxies are smaller, fuzzier, their light stretched red, their shapes irregular. It feels like moving from a modern city into older streets, then into ancient foundations, then into the earliest traces of building. Not because time is reversing, but because you're simply looking farther. And the most comforting part is that this time travel has no urgency. The past isn't disappearing. The photons already left. They're on their way. You can receive them at your own pace. Hubble did the receiving for you, quietly collecting faint signals and turning them into images that make the ages visible. You, in your quiet room, can let those ages loosen your grip on the present. The universe has been building galaxies for billions of years. It has watched collisions and calm eras, bursts of star formation and slow fading, spirals forming and rounder systems settling into smoother light. Hubble lets you see that history in snapshots, and every snapshot says the same gentle thing. Change is normal, structure is possible, and time is wide enough to hold both. You keep that wide time in your chest like a slow, steady warmth. The nebula nursery behind you feels like the beginning of a story, and the galaxies ahead feel like the postcards that follow, each one arriving quietly, asking nothing from you except a little attention, the kind you can give without effort as your thoughts soften further into the dark. The farther back those galactic postcards carry you, the more you start noticing a particular kind of darkness that isn't the soft, empty kind you've been leaning into. This darkness feels organized. It sits at the center of things. It behaves like a quiet authority. And the soothing part is that it doesn't jump out at you. It doesn't need to. It just pulls. Black holes have a reputation for being the universe's drama queens, swallowing everything, ripping stars apart, basically acting like they own the place. But the truth is calmer, and Hubble's way of showing you black holes is calmer too. Hubble doesn't stare into a black hole and see it like a hole cut into the sky. It watches what happens around it. The way you can tell there's a campfire nearby without seeing the flame because the air smells like smoke and the light flickers on the trees. That's the cozy version. Black holes are mostly known by their effects, like hearing thunder from far away while you're already safe under blankets. You don't need to go outside and stand in the rain to believe it's storming. You just listen to the low rumble, feel the distance in it, and stay warm. Hubble is excellent at listening to those rumbles. At the center of many galaxies, spirals, ellipticals, the ones that look well-behaved and the ones that look like they've been through a messy breakup, there's strong evidence for supermassive black holes. Not because someone found a sign that says black hole lives here, but because stars and gas near the center move as if something heavy and compact is sitting there, holding the whole neighborhood in its grip. Hubble can measure that motion. It watches stars orbiting. It watches gas disks swirling. It uses the way light shifts, blue when something moves toward you, red when it moves away, to map speeds. The calm detail is that none of this requires fireworks. It's geometry and patience again. The same steady attention that made the deep field possible now turns inward toward galactic hearts. You imagine a galaxy's central region as a crowded city of stars. Close in, everything is tighter, brighter, more packed. If there's a supermassive black hole there, its gravity dominates the motion in the innermost region. Stars whip around faster than they would if only normal amounts of matter were present. Gas forms a rotating disk, like a record spinning in the dark. Hubble can resolve those central regions in nearby galaxies well enough to see that rotation and measure the speed. Speed is the giveaway. Faster orbits at smaller radii means stronger gravity from a compact mass. It's like watching leaves spiral around a drain. You don't need to see the pipe to know the water is going somewhere specific. The pattern tells you. And there's something deeply relaxing about that kind of indirect knowing. It's not panic-based. It's not superstition. It's observation. A black hole can be the most extreme object you can imagine, and the way you detect it can still be gentle. A careful measurement, a quiet curve on a graph, a steady pattern in light. Hubble helped confirm that supermassive black holes are common, maybe even basically standard, at the centers of large galaxies. That's one of those facts that sounds unsettling until you realize how calm it actually makes the universe feel. It means galaxies are not just random star piles. They're structured systems with deep gravitational anchors. It's like finding out the house has a foundation you can't see but can feel in the way it stands. And if your mind likes structure before sleep, that's a gift. The universe isn't chaos. It has patterns sturdy enough that you can infer invisible things from visible motion. Sometimes those invisible things put on a show, though, and Hubble catches it in a way that feels like watching a distant lighthouse beam through fog, bright, rhythmic, safely far away. When matter falls toward a black hole, it doesn't usually drop straight in. It spirals, forming an accretion disk, heating up through friction and gravity until it glows. That glow can be intense, especially in active galaxies where the central black hole is feeding on a lot of gas. The disk and surrounding regions can shine across wavelengths and Hubble's sensitivity, especially in visible and ultraviolet, lets it study those bright cores. So black holes aren't always just darkness. Sometimes they're surrounded by light so energetic that the galaxy's center outshines the rest of the galaxy. That's how quasars and active galactic nuclei announce themselves. A brilliant, compact core, sometimes with jets, narrow beams of particles and energy, shooting out from the region near the black hole. Hubble has observed jets in striking detail. One of the most famous is in the galaxy M87, where a bright jet extends outward from the core like a cosmic brushstroke. It's not the black hole itself you're seeing. It's the effect of the black hole's environment. Magnetic fields and energetic particles being channeled into a focused stream. The jet is like a signature written in light and structure. Something incredibly powerful is happening at the center, even if the center itself remains unseen. And the calming part is how stable and elegant those jets can look in Hubble images. Like the universe is capable of both violence and precision, and it chooses precision. The jet isn't a chaotic spray. It's a narrow line, sometimes knotted with bright features where shocks happen, sometimes changing subtly over time. It looks purposeful, even though purpose isn't the right word. It's physics doing what physics does when extreme gravity and strong magnetic fields share a small stage. You don't have to feel fear when you think about it, because Hubble's view keeps it at the right distance. It's the bedtime-friendly distance, close enough to appreciate detail, far enough to feel safe. There's another gentle way Hubble makes black holes feel cozy. It turns them into caretakers of rhythm. In some galaxies, the core's brightness flickers or varies. Not random, but patterned. Matter swirls in, heats up, flares, calms. Sometimes a star passes too close, and the tidal forces, the difference in gravity from one side of the star to the other, can tear it apart. That sounds brutal if you picture it like a horror scene. But in reality, it's a process of matter being stretched and heated and redistributed. Hubble can catch the aftermath as a temporary flare from a galaxy that was otherwise quiet, a sudden brightening that fades over weeks or months. The universe, even in its harshest places, tends to tell its stories through light curves, brightness rising and falling like a slow breath. It's oddly soothing. Even an extreme event becomes a gentle graph over time, a pulse rather than a scream. And then there are the quiet black holes, the ones not actively feeding. They're there, heavy and silent, shaping the orbits of nearby stars, influencing the dynamics of the core. Hubble's contribution here is subtle but profound. By measuring many galaxies, it helped build a picture of how black hole mass relates to properties of the host galaxy, how the central black hole and the galaxy's bulge seem linked, as if they grew together over cosmic time. That idea makes the universe feel more integrated, not a scattered set of isolated objects, but a connected ecosystem. The galaxy's stars, gas, dust, and central black hole are not strangers forced to share an address. They're part of a shared history. Growth influences growth. Gravity writes long contracts. You can let that settle as a soft kind of magnificence. The universe builds structures that are self-consistent, as if it prefers coherence. Even the darkest objects fit into patterns. Hubble also gives you black holes as silhouettes in a different sense. Not by showing the hole, but by showing the absence of light in the center of a swirling disk or the sharpness of a dust lane cutting across a bright nucleus. In some galaxies, you see a thick disk of dust around the core like a dark ring, and you know there's something heavy inside it, because the ring is rotating with discipline. The image itself becomes a calm proof. Motion implies mass, structure implies gravity, gravity implies an anchor. And it's hard not to notice how these images echo earlier parts of the story. Remember the deep field, the way nothing turned into thousands of galaxies when Hubble refused to look away? Black holes are a different nothing, a central darkness that becomes meaningful only when you watch the surrounding light long enough. Both are lessons in the same kind of attention. Don't rush. Don't assume emptiness is empty. Don't expect the obvious. The universe often hides its most important facts inside quiet patterns. Even the way Hubble points and holds, those tiny corrections the guide stars use like calm reference points, feels relevant here. Because to measure motion near galactic centers, you need sharp images. You need stable pointing. You need light collected cleanly, without smear. Hubble's steadiness becomes part of the black hole story, not just a technical detail, but a mood. Calm enough to notice small motions, disciplined enough to read subtle shifts. You might catch yourself smiling at the contrast. The same species that can't keep track of where it left its keys build a telescope that can measure the gravitational influence of an invisible object millions or billions of times the mass of the sun, from millions of light years away, by watching tiny differences in light. It's both ridiculous and beautiful. A little bit of cosmic competence, delivered by a machine wrapped in what still looks like a very expensive space blanket. And as your thoughts soften again, the black holes stop feeling like monsters and start feeling like landmarks, quiet centers, gravitational punctuation marks in the sentences of galaxies. Hubble doesn't hype them. It simply shows you the curves of motion, the glow of disks, the straightness of jets, the pulses of distant flares, and the calm, persistent truth that you can understand darkness by watching how light behaves around it. That's a gentle kind of power to carry into sleep. The idea that not everything needs to be confronted directly. Some things are understood sideways, through patterns, through patience, through calm observation. The universe offers you those patterns whether you're awake to appreciate them or not. And somewhere in the background of all this, beneath the jets and disks and measured orbits, there's a quieter thread forming. The same careful measurement that lets Hubble weigh invisible masses is the same kind of careful measurement that will let it take the universe's scale and timing seriously, turning light into distance, motion into meaning, and the vastness itself into something you can hold without strain. The same calm logic you use to sense a black hole without seeing it. Watch the motion, trust the pattern, start showing up in a different form, one that feels almost tender because it's so repetitive. Hubble doesn't only look outward, it measures. It turns light into a kind of clock, and then turns that clock into a ruler. and then uses that ruler to take the universe's pulse without ever raising its voice. You can picture it like this. The universe is expanding, and that expansion leaves fingerprints in the light. Galaxies moving away have their light shifted toward red, stretched like taffy by distance and motion. That redshift tells you something about speed. But speed alone is just a half story. To understand expansion, you need distance too. You need to know how far away something is, and that's where the universe gets shy, because distance is the one thing it rarely labels clearly. Hubble's most relaxing trick is that it doesn't demand the universe hand over a tape measure. It builds one, step by step, using objects that repeat themselves. It's almost like the telescope has a taste for rhythms. Pulses, cycles, predictable patterns, because rhythms are easier to trust when the rest of space feels so huge. The first step is close to home in cosmic terms. Parallax. The simplest kind of distance measurement, the one you've accidentally used your whole life without calling it science. If you hold a finger up and switch which eye is open, your finger jumps against a background. That jump depends on how far your finger is from your face. Nearby objects shift more, distant objects shift less. It's geometry, and it's gentle. From Earth, parallax works well for nearby stars, but it's limited because your baseline, the size of Earth's orbit, is only so large, and distant stars barely shift at all. Still, parallax gives you the first rungs of the ladder. A few solid distances you can stand on. Hubble didn't invent parallax, but its precision and its role alongside other measurements helps strengthen the chain of calibration that depends on those first steps. You can think of it like checking the first knot in a rope bridge. If the first knot holds, the rest of the bridge becomes less scary. Then comes the part that feels made for sleep, Cepheid variable stars. Cepheids are stars that brighten and dim in a steady, repeating cycle. Not because they're moody, because their outer layers expand and contract in a physical rhythm, like a slow cosmic breathing you can almost match with your own. Bright, dim, over days or weeks depending on the star. The universe, again, choosing repetition. The calm miracle is that the period of a Cepheid's pulse is linked to its true brightness. Longer period means intrinsically brighter. Shorter period means intrinsically dimmer. This relationship is like a built-in label. If you watch a Cepheid long enough to measure its period, you can infer its true luminosity. Then you compare that true brightness to how bright it looks from Earth, and the difference tells you distance. It's the same quiet logic as hearing a familiar song at a muffled volume and realizing you must be far from the speaker. This is where Hubble becomes a patient listener again. It looks for Cepheids in other galaxies, which isn't easy because you're trying to pick out individual pulsing stars in a sea of other stars from millions of light years away. It's the cosmic version of noticing a single blinking porch light in a distant city, except the city is an entire galaxy and the blinking is subtle. Hubble can do it because it has the stability and sharpness to resolve those stars cleanly. It can watch them over time, return to them, measure their rise and fall. The telescope's orbit becomes part of the cadence. Come back around, look again, record another point on the brightness curve. The same kind of repetition that made the deep field possible now becomes the repetition that builds a distance ladder. Not glamorous, just steady. You can feel how this method soothes the whole concept of measuring the universe. It's not one grand measurement. It's a series of small, trustworthy ones. Measure nearby Cepheids with parallax. Use those to calibrate the Cepheid relationship. Then use Cepheids in nearby galaxies to calibrate other distance indicators that reach farther. It's the universe's scale built like a bedtime routine. One step leads smoothly into the next, and nothing is rushed. Once Cepheids give you distances to certain galaxies, you can move to brighter events that can be seen much farther away. Type I supernovae. These are exploding stars, yes, but the way Hubble uses them is not about spectacle. It's about consistency. Type I supernovae have a predictable brightness pattern because they come from a similar kind of setup, and that makes them useful as standard candles. Objects whose intrinsic brightness is known well enough that their observed brightness gives you distance. The trick is that you can't just assume their brightness. You have to calibrate it using nearer supernovae in galaxies whose distances you already know from Cepheids. This is where the latter idea becomes beautifully literal. You don't jump to the top rung, you climb. Hubble played a major role in watching Cepheids in galaxies that later hosted type I supernovae, tying the rungs together. Cepheids set the distance to the host galaxy. The supernova's observed brightness in that galaxy tells you the supernova's true brightness. Then you can use similar supernovae in much more distant galaxies to measure distances far beyond where Cepheids can be seen. Suddenly, you've built a ruler that reaches deep into the universe. And when you have distance and redshift together, how far and how fast away, you can estimate the expansion rate of the universe, the Hubble constant. It's one of those quantities that feels like it should be abstract, but it's really just the universe's current pace, its present tense. How fast is the stretching happening per unit distance? The idea of a cosmic pace is oddly comforting. Even expansion has a rhythm. Even the biggest thing has a measurable tempo. You can imagine Hubble, the telescope, taking the pulse of space itself, not by touching it, but by watching patterns repeat, a Cepheid swelling and shrinking, a supernova brightening and fading, a galaxy's light shifting toward red. Each measurement is like listening to the same song performed in different rooms, at different distances, and gradually figuring out the layout of the entire building. There's also a human softness to the process. No single measurement is perfect. Dust in galaxies can dim light and fool you if you don't correct for it. Crowded star fields can blend together, making a Cepheid look brighter than it truly is. Instruments have quirks. The universe does not hand over clean data in a gift box with a bow on top. Hubble's calm contribution is precision and consistency over time, the ability to reduce uncertainty by observing carefully, repeatedly, and with enough sharpness to separate what's real from what's merely blended. It's the same theme again, attention over time. You can even feel the gentleness in how scientists handle it. They don't treat one measurement as a proclamation carved in stone. They compare, they cross-check, they refine, they argue politely in papers and conferences, which is the scientific version of whispering intensely. The numbers get better because the process is patient, and the results matter because they connect to something you can sense in your bones. The universe is not static. It's moving, stretching, changing. The night sky feels fixed when you glance up, but Hubble helps prove that the whole space between things is slowly growing. Galaxies aren't just sitting out there like beads on a string. The string is being pulled. If that sounds unsettling, it doesn't have to be. Expansion is not a threat. It's just the universe being honest about time passing. Everything that lives in time changes. Even the largest structure you can imagine participates in that truth. Hubble's measurements also give your mind a comforting sense of scale. Without a distance ladder, the universe can feel like a jumble of pretty objects with no depth, like stickers on a black page. With a distance ladder, the sky gains perspective. This galaxy is here. That galaxy is farther. That faint smudge is unimaginably distant. The deep field stops being just, wow, lots of galaxies, and becomes, wow, lots of history stacked in one tiny direction. And the ladder isn't only about distance. It's about trust. Each rung depends on the one below it. That dependence feels calm because it's structured. If you've ever been kept awake by the feeling that life is random, structure can be a sedative. Not rigid structure, not suffocating structure, just enough order to make the vastness feel navigable. There's a quiet moment you can hold on to here, a Cepheid pulsing in a nearby galaxy, its brightness rising and falling with a steady period. Hubble watches it patiently, returning orbit after orbit, building a light curve point by point. The star doesn't know it's part of a cosmic measuring stick. It's just doing what physics makes it do: expand, contract, glow, dim. The universe provides the rhythm. Hubble provides the attention. Humans provide the translation. And you, lying here, get to feel the calm outcome, a universe with a measurable heartbeat. Of course, when you measure a heartbeat carefully, you sometimes notice something strange, small disagreements between methods, subtle tensions in the numbers that refuse to smooth out completely. It's not chaos. It's a puzzle shaped like a gentle frown. The kind of mystery that doesn't break the bedtime mood because it doesn't feel like danger. It feels like the universe reminding you it still has layers. For the moment, the comfort stays in the ladder itself. The way patience becomes scale, the way repetition becomes certainty, the way Hubble turns distant light into a steady pulse you can understand. The telescope keeps circling above Earth in its familiar rhythm, wrapped in that expensive space blanket, holding its gaze with quiet discipline, measuring not just objects, but the tempo of space between them, one careful rung at a time. That gentle frown in the number stays with you like a half-remembered tune, the kind that repeats itself when the room gets quiet. A universe with a measurable heartbeat should feel satisfying, like finally getting the right rhythm after tapping your foot all day. And yet the more carefully the heartbeat is measured, the more it hints that something in the background is pushing, stretching, coaxing the cosmos outward in a way that isn't just simple momentum. This is where the story becomes deliciously calm, because it hands you a truth that bedtime actually likes. Not everything is solved. Not everything is supposed to be solved right away. The universe isn't obligated to give you closure just because your brain is tired and wants to tidy the living room of reality before sleep. Hubble's role in this part of the story is subtle and strangely intimate. It doesn't discover dark energy in the sense of pointing at a glowing blob labeled dark energy. Thank you for visiting. It helps reveal the behavior of expansion with enough precision that a new kind of emptiness becomes impossible to ignore. The expansion isn't just happening. It appears to be accelerating, as if the space between galaxies is stretching faster over time, like a slow breath that quietly deepens instead of fading. Acceleration is such a loaded word in normal life. It means stress. It means the to-do list getting longer. It means your phone dying faster because you refuse to stop refreshing. But in cosmology, acceleration is almost serene. It's not a sudden lurch. It's a gentle, persistent trend you only notice when you look across vast time and distance. The universe is the opposite of impulsive. It commits to its changes slowly enough that you can't sense them directly, only infer them by comparing careful measurements. The story began with those type I supernovae you were already holding, bright, reliable events that can be used as distance markers once calibrated. When astronomers started using them to map the expansion at different epochs, the result didn't match the simplest expectation. Distant supernovae appeared dimmer than they should be in a universe whose expansion is steadily slowing under gravity's pull. Dimmer means farther than expected, which means the universe expanded more than expected in the time since the light was emitted. The simplest way to make that make sense is to accept that expansion has not been slowing the way you'd assume. It has been speeding up for a long stretch of cosmic history. Hubble, hovering above Earth in its steady loop, becomes one of the quiet enablers of that revelation. It can see faint, distant supernovae more cleanly than ground-based telescopes often can, especially when you want to separate the supernova's light from the background glow of its host galaxy. It can take sharp images that let you measure the brightness precisely, track the way the light rises and falls, confirm the type, reduce the chances that dust or crowding is fooling you. The telescope doesn't argue about the meaning. It just gives you the cleanest possible whisper from far away, and the whisper keeps saying the same thing. Something is nudging space itself. That nudge gets a name that sounds like a noir character who never shows their face: dark energy. It's not dark because it's evil, and not energy in the sense of a glowing fuel you can scoop into a bucket. It's a label for whatever is driving the acceleration. A placeholder that admits ignorance while still being useful. Humans love placeholders. They act like the little sticky notes of science. We don't fully understand this yet, but we're not going to pretend it's not there. And there's a kind of psychological comfort in that honesty. Dark energy isn't a monster, it's an admission. It's the universe saying, calmly, you can measure what I'm doing even if you don't fully know why I'm doing it. If your mind has a habit of getting tense when something isn't explained, this is a good moment to learn the soft skill Hubble keeps teaching. Living with the unknown without turning it into fear. Mystery doesn't have to be a threat. Mystery can be a wide, quiet room you're allowed to rest in. The most common, simplest explanation people reach for is the cosmological constant, an idea that goes back to the notion that empty space might have its own energy, vacuum energy, that doesn't dilute as the universe expands. That's the weird part that can feel almost bedtime-friendly once you stop fighting it. Matter spreads out and becomes less influential as the universe grows. But a property of space itself would stay per unit volume. So as space increases, the total push from that property becomes more significant. It's like the stage is getting bigger while the props stay the same size. So the emptiness starts to dominate the scene. You don't need to solve vacuum energy tonight. Nobody has. The soothing point is that Hubble helps you see the behavior clearly enough that you can treat it as real, even if the deeper explanation remains hazy. In a strange way, that's how you live your own life too. You can know you're tired without fully explaining every reason you feel tired. You can accept the sensation. You can respond with care. Not everything needs a final theory at 2 a.m. Hubble's contribution to this whole question also comes through the way it sees gravity's subtle fingerprints across large scales. Massive objects bend light. You've already brushed against that in the idea of galaxies and clusters acting as lenses. Hubble's sharp vision makes those lensing patterns measurable in fine detail. When a cluster magnifies and distorts background galaxies, the exact shapes of those arcs and smears tell you about how mass is distributed in the cluster, including mass you can't see directly. That includes dark matter, of course, but it also ties into dark energy because the way structures grow over time depends on how expansion behaves. If expansion accelerates, it changes the universe's ability to pull matter together into bigger clumps. Gravity is always trying to gather. Expansion is always stretching the space between. Dark energy, if it's truly a persistent push, changes the balance, making it harder for new large structures to form as the universe ages. So by looking at lensing, at how clusters bend light, at how galaxies are distributed and how those distributions evolve, you can get another angle on the same cosmic mystery. Again, not by staring at dark energy, but by watching how the universe responds to the rules it's living under. This is the point where the magnificence becomes almost quiet and regal. You're not chasing flashy images anymore. You're sitting with the behavior of the cosmos itself, with the idea that the universe has a mood that changes over billions of years. It began hot and dense, it expanded and cooled, structures formed, stars lit up, galaxies assembled, and then, over time, the expansion started to accelerate. The universe doesn't just have scenery, it has a storyline. Hubble is a storyteller who refuses to use dramatic voiceovers. It tells the story through careful measurement, a distant supernova's brightness, a Cepheid's pulse, a lensing arc's curve, a galaxy's shape stretched by time. The data accumulates until the narrative is unavoidable. And if you feel any tension creeping in because accelerating expansion sounds like the universe might be running away from itself, you can let that tension go. The acceleration is not a chase. It's not the universe panicking. It's a gentle trend across a scale so enormous that your nervous system doesn't need to treat it as immediate. It's cosmic weather, not personal danger. The galaxies are not going to suddenly vanish while you sleep. The night sky will still be there when you wake up, and the photons will still be arriving whether you worry about them or not. There's also a peaceful irony in how humans respond to this mystery. We want a single neat answer the way a cat wants to sit in the exact spot you were about to use. We want a label, a cause, a story with an ending. Dark energy refuses to cooperate. It stays undefined, a question mark with measurable consequences. It's almost like the universe is teaching the same lesson Hubble embodies. You can do meaningful work without full closure. You can keep looking without pretending you've finished understanding. Hubble's long life adds a special calm to this part because the telescope didn't just take one measurement and walk away. It watched the story unfold across decades of observation. It helped refine distance measurements by repeatedly returning to Cepheids in different galaxies. It helped tighten the calibration of supernova distances. It helped make the cosmic ladder sturdier, which matters a lot because the acceleration story depends on trusting your ruler. And that brings you back to that quiet tension you felt earlier. The way different methods of measuring the universe's current expansion rate don't always perfectly agree. Hubble's precise distance work sits right in the middle of that conversation. It's part of what makes the question so alive. When careful measurements disagree, it doesn't necessarily mean someone messed up. Sometimes it means the universe is nudging you again, asking you to notice that your model might be missing a subtle piece. That possibility can sound unsettling if you treat science like a list of finished facts. But science is closer to a calm, ongoing conversation with reality. Hubble is one of the best conversationalists we ever built. It listens longer than most instruments can. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't get bored. It just keeps collecting light and allowing humans to translate it into understanding one careful improvement at a time. And that's the most sleep-friendly way to hold dark energy. Not as a looming unknown, but as a wide, quiet mystery that the universe is perfectly comfortable carrying. The cosmos isn't anxious about its own acceleration. It simply is. You're allowed to mirror that calm. You don't need to solve the universe to rest inside it. You can imagine Hubble continuing its orbit, passing from sun into shadow, wrapped in that crinkly insulation that looks like a space blanket, because it basically is. Inside, detectors wait. Outside, Earth turns. Far beyond, galaxies recede, their light stretched red, their distances layered like deep water. Somewhere out there, a supernova's light is on its way, carrying a small clue. Somewhere else, a cluster bends the path of a more ancient beam, letting Hubble read the curve like a fingerprint. All of it happening without urgency, without noise, without needing you to stay awake. The mystery remains, and it remains gently. Dark energy doesn't slam the door on understanding. It leaves it slightly open, letting curiosity breathe. And that open door is the perfect shape for the story to move toward its next quiet room. The idea that Hubble, even while it measures the grandest forces, also belongs to a human network, an archive that never sleeps, a shared memory of light that keeps expanding not in panic, but in generosity. That open door feeling stays in the air, mystery breathing, not threatening, just present, and it changes the way you think about Hubble's work. Because the telescope isn't only a set of observations locked in the past, like a scrapbook you flip through once and put away. It's more like a library that keeps adding shelves while you're asleep, a place where the same quiet photons can be read again and again by different minds for different questions in different years, without the light ever needing to be recaptured. Hubble takes the images, sure, and those images are famous enough to have their own fan club. But the truly relaxing fact is that Hubble also gives away the raw ingredients. Measurements, spectra, exposures, all the careful bits behind the pretty picture. And it does it with the calm generosity of something that doesn't care who gets the credit as long as the universe gets understood. You can picture this invisible pipeline like a gentle river. Hubble looks, the instruments record, the signals are stored, the data is sent down to Earth, processed, checked, calibrated, organized. And then it becomes available, not only to the team that asked for that observation, but eventually to everyone. It's as if Hubble whispers to the planet, and the planet keeps the whisper safe in a vault that anyone can visit later. There's something deeply soothing about the idea that the telescope never truly stops working. Even when it's not actively taking a new image of some distant galaxy, It's still producing value because its older observations keep being mined for meaning. An observation made for one purpose can become the perfect missing piece for a different purpose years later. A field observed to study star formation might later be used to hunt for a faint supernova that no one noticed at the time. A galaxy imaged for its shape might later be used to measure subtle lensing distortions. The photons don't change. The questions do. That's a quiet kind of immortality, and Hubble has it in a way that feels almost human. You've probably had moments where something you learned long ago suddenly becomes useful, some random fact, some half-remembered skill, some bit of experience you thought was just clutter. Hubble's archive is that feeling made cosmic. The past keeps paying interest. It also means the telescope belongs to more people than you might assume. Not just astronauts and mission controllers and scientists in serious sweaters. It belongs to anyone curious enough to look, because the data has a way of traveling outward through time and community. One person proposes an observation, another person later reanalyzes it, another person combines it with other data, another person uses it in a classroom, another person turns it into an image that makes a kid stare at the ceiling thinking about galaxies instead of algebra. And Hubble has a particularly gentle way of being involved in all of those lives without ever needing to be in the room. It's the opposite of attention-seeking. It just keeps circling, collecting, sending, storing. Meanwhile, down here, the archive quietly grows into something like a second telescope, one made of memory instead of metal. You can sink into the mechanics of it, because mechanics can be calming when they're orderly. Hubble observes in chunks of time, and each chunk becomes a file, a set of exposures. Those exposures go through processing that corrects for known behaviors of the instruments, how detectors respond, how sensitivity varies, how cosmic rays occasionally hit the sensor and leave a bright streak like a little space scribble. The processing isn't glamorous. It's careful housekeeping. It turns raw signals into something consistent enough to trust. It's the data equivalent of cleaning a window, so you can see the night outside without smudges. The cosmic rays are a strangely cozy detail. Honestly, you're lying in bed, and somewhere above the atmosphere, high-energy particles are constantly zipping through space, occasionally hitting Hubble's detectors like invisible confetti. The telescope can't stop that from happening, so the system simply accounts for it. Multiple exposures are taken so the random strikes can be identified and removed. The universe throws tiny surprises, and the response is calm redundancy. If that isn't a bedtime lesson, nothing is. Then the observations are organized with their context. Where Hubble pointed, when it pointed, what filters it used, what instrument settings were involved. Context is what turns information into something usable. Without context, an image is just a picture. With context, it becomes part of the long conversation you were feeling earlier. The conversation where distance ladders are built, where dark energy is inferred, where black holes are weighed without being seen. The archive is also where Hubble's personality becomes clearer. Not the telescope's personality. Hubble is still a machine, still not emotionally invested in anything, but the personality of its record. You start seeing patterns in what it has watched. Beloved targets revisited, famous fields studied over and over, galaxies observed in multiple wavelengths, nebulae captured not just once, but with new cameras as instruments improved. The archive holds Hubble's long attention, and long attention has a texture. It feels like devotion, even when it's just scheduling. And the scheduling is its own quiet art. Hubble's observing time is precious. People compete for it. Proposals are written, reviewed, selected. But even that competitive human layer has a surprisingly calming outcome, because it forces clarity. To get Hubble time, you have to state what you want and why you want it. You have to be specific. You have to be patient. You have to accept that you might not get what you ask for. And that's not personal. It's just priorities and physics and limited orbits. The whole process is a reminder that attention is valuable, which makes the telescope's attention feel even more sacred. Then, After the initial period when the observers have first rights to analyze what they requested, the data becomes available to everyone. That transition, from private project to public resource, is one of Hubble's quiet gifts to humanity. It's like a story that begins as a letter and ends as a book on the shelf for anyone to borrow. And that's where the archive starts doing its favorite trick. It connects strangers through shared light. A researcher in one country can pull older observations and combine them with newer ones to see how something changed over time. A student can practice analyzing real astronomical data and learn that science isn't a set of perfect answers. It's a relationship with uncertainty. An amateur image processor can take public data and create a new rendering, still faithful to the measurements, that brings out subtle structures the standard processing didn't emphasize. Hubble's photons get interpreted by many eyes, each eye adding a slightly different kind of care. There's a gentle sarcasm to how quietly revolutionary that is. Humans can't agree on how to load a dishwasher, but we can agree, often surprisingly, to share a space telescope's data with the world. The universe really brings out the best in us sometimes, or at least the most cooperative version. The archive also means Hubble's most famous images aren't always the ones that mattered most to science. Some observations are visually dramatic, some are not. Some of the most important measurements are numbers in a table, faint spectra that look like thin lines, time series plots that show a star pulsing or a supernova fading. The archive holds all of it, beauty and utility, without ranking it by how likely it is to become someone's phone wallpaper. And that can be soothing if you've ever felt pressure to be impressive in a visible way. The archive reminds you that value can be quiet. Some discoveries are loud because they're pretty. Some discoveries are quiet because they're precise. Hubble supports both. You can imagine yourself wandering through that library of light the way you might wander through a museum after closing hours, when no one is rushing you, and every hallway feels like it belongs to the hush. One room holds nebulae, gas and dust glowing in coded colors. Another holds galaxies in every mood, grand spirals, compact ellipticals, messy mergers frozen in slow-motion drama. Another holds deep fields like windows into time. Another holds the subtle signatures of black holes, motions, jets, glowing cores. Another holds the careful observations used to build the distance ladder. And somewhere behind all of it, the measurements that helped push the idea of dark energy into the realm of real enough to take seriously sit quietly, like a note in the margin of the universe's diary. It's comforting to realize that this library is not just an archive of images. It's an archive of human choices. Each dataset represents a moment when someone decided a particular question was worth asking. Someone decided to spend precious observing time on that particular patch of sky. Someone decided to stare at nothing long enough to find thousands of galaxies. Someone decided to track a star's pulse long enough to turn it into a ruler. Someone decided to take the universe's pulse rather than just admire the scenery. When you think about it this way, Hubble becomes less like a single telescope and more like a long, collective act of attention. The telescope is the hardware, but the archive is the shared mind that grows around it. And that shared mind never really sleeps. People across the planet work in different time zones. Someone is always analyzing something. Someone is always reprocessing old observations with improved techniques. Someone is always comparing Hubble data with other observatories, stitching together a richer picture. The archive is active even when the telescope is in Earth's shadow, even when the telescope is turned away from the sun, even when the telescope is simply waiting for the next observing window. The night shift on Earth and the night shift in orbit overlap in a slow, continuous loop. There's a soft comfort in that continuity. You don't have to hold all the curiosity yourself. You don't have to be the one who understands everything. Curiosity is distributed. The work is shared. The universe is wide, and the attention given to it is wide too. You can even feel how this connects back to the beginning of the story, back to that launch room hush, the idea of sending a telescope into orbit to escape atmospheric blur. The plan wasn't only get a clear picture. The plan was build a record that could outlast any single researcher, any single moment of excitement. A record sturdy enough that future questions not yet imagined in 1990, could still be asked using light already collected. That's the kind of calm foresight that makes Hubble feel almost like a gentle ancestor. It didn't just do its job for its own era. It collected gifts for the future. It built a treasure chest of photons that you, right now, get to benefit from simply by existing at a time when the chest has been filled. And you can feel, in the quiet behind your eyes, the story leaning toward its final shape without forcing itself. An instrument that was built to be serviced, fixed, upgraded, and kept alive. A telescope that learned to see clearly after an early stumble. A machine that turned patience into deep fields and rhythms into rulers. A witness that helped make mystery sharper instead of scarier. The archive holds all those chapters at once, stacked like layers of light, waiting whenever a mind, maybe yours, decides to look. Hubble keeps circling overhead, a calm metronome above the atmosphere, while the library on Earth keeps expanding with every observation it has ever made. And somewhere between the orbit and the archive, between the ancient photons and the human questions, there's a gentle sense that nothing meaningful is ever completely lost. Light becomes data, data becomes memory, memory becomes understanding, and understanding becomes that quiet, sleepy feeling of belonging to something vast that doesn't require you to stay awake to be part of it. The archive keeps growing behind the scenes. Shelves of quiet photons stacked so neatly that it almost feels unfair to call it data, like it's just another folder on a desktop. It's more like a long memory of attention, and it makes Hubble feel less like a machine and more like a habit humanity learned. Look carefully, keep what you see, share it, return later with better questions. Decades of that habit have a weight to them, not heavy like a burden, heavy like a quilt that actually stays put. Hubble's age shows up in gentle, practical ways, the way you notice the age of something well-loved, not in rust and decay. Space is cold and clean in its own unforgiving way, but in limits, in components that were never meant to last forever and still keep showing up to work anyway. Gyroscopes get tired. Electronics become old-fashioned. Detectors pick up scars from radiation the way a window picks up faint scratches over years. None of it feels tragic. It feels honest. A long-lived instrument collects time the same way it collects light. That honesty is part of the legacy. Hubble didn't become legendary because it was flawless. It became legendary because it kept going. After the early blur, after the fix that turned embarrassment into clarity, after servicing missions that looked like slow-motion ASMR performed in pressurized gloves. The gloved hands, the careful latches, the telescope held like a patient on a table while Earth rolled below. Those images still echo, and they make everything Hubble did afterward feel earned. The universe became sharper because humans moved carefully. Somewhere along the way, Hubble also became a cultural heartbeat, the rare scientific tool that slipped into everyday life without losing its seriousness. People who couldn't name a single constellation still recognized a Hubble image the way you recognize a familiar song in the first few notes. Posters went up on bedroom walls. Documentaries borrowed its frames. Classrooms used it as proof that space isn't just a black cartoon background. Even the idea of space photography started to feel normal, which is honestly wild if you remember the early blur and the fact that this whole enterprise involved fixing a telescope in orbit like it was an appliance you refused to give up on. Then the telescope kept doing what careful things do. It stayed consistent. It returned to targets the way a friend actually follows through. It revisited nebulae to show how light carves clouds into glowing edges. It stared into empty darkness until the darkness confessed it was crowded, that grain of sand patch turning into a whole city of galaxies. It measured pulses and brightness curves until distance became something you could trust. It watched the signatures around black holes and made the invisible feel real without ever needing a jump scare. It helped push the expansion story into a quieter, stranger truth, and then kept providing evidence without pretending to understand everything. That's a soothing form of greatness. Not the loud kind, the durable kind. And the upgrades weren't just heroic stories. They changed what the telescope could notice. New cameras arrived, then newer ones, each one more sensitive, each one better at pulling faint structure out of darkness without turning it into noise. Hubble learned to see more gently, which sounds backwards until you realize sensitivity is a kind of gentleness, the ability to hear a whisper without demanding a shout. That steady improvement is why old targets sometimes look newly alive when revisited. Same nebula, same galaxy, sharper truth. You also start noticing how Hubble's legacy isn't only what it saw, but how it changed the way seeing is done. Before it, the sky was already studied, already mapped, already loved. After it, expectations shifted. People began to expect crispness, depth, a kind of clarity that feels like clean water. The idea of pointing into a patch of night that seems blank and committing long attention to it became normal, not an eccentric gamble. The idea of building beauty from multiple filters and translating invisible light into meaning became part of the shared language. Even the idea of fixing an orbiting observatory, of designing something to be improved rather than replaced, became a quiet statement about how to treat expensive dreams, build them to endure, and accept that endurance includes maintenance. Hubble also taught the planet to live with timelines that don't match human impatience. It takes years to design instruments, years to schedule observations, years to analyze and reanalyze. A result can arrive long after the person who proposed the observation has changed jobs, changed cities, changed entire life chapters. The photons don't care. They keep arriving. The archive keeps holding them. Someone else finds them later and smiles at the perfect coincidence. The clue was already sitting there, waiting for the right question. If daily life feels like it's constantly demanding immediate replies, that slow tempo is medicine. The universe is not a group chat. The handoff begins the way handoffs always begin, quietly while the older thing is still doing its job. New observatories rise, each one built to hear a different part of the cosmic song. James Webb listens deeper in infrared, tuned for the faint warmth of early galaxies and dust-hidden nurseries, like trading a flashlight for a lantern that sees through fog. Future surveys widen the view, mapping broad fields with a calm, steady sweep. Other instruments listen in X-rays or radio, catching stories Hubble can't tell because its ears were never shaped for those frequencies. The baton passes without anyone needing to declare a winner. It's not a replacement. It's an expansion. More ways to listen, more ways to translate. Hubble stays important in that chorus because it's still the sharp, steady, eye invisible and ultraviolet, still the one that can pin down detail and provide context. A wide survey can say, something is here. Hubble can often say, here is what it looks like up close. An infrared observatory can reveal what dust hides. Hubble can show the sculpted edges where light meets shadow, the crisp star fields, the fine structure in galaxies that makes the scene feel real. The work becomes collaborative in a way that's quietly beautiful. Different instruments telling different verses of the same poem, stitched into a fuller understanding. And you have a place in that, even if you never touch a telescope. Every time an image makes you pause, every time a fact makes your shoulders loosen, you're part of the legacy. Hubble's greatest trick might be that it made the universe feel both larger and more intimate at the same time. Larger in scale, more intimate in detail. It's easier to care about what you can see clearly. The end of a long mission doesn't arrive as a dramatic curtain drop. It arrives as a gradual narrowing of options, a growing need for careful choices, a gentle acceptance that nothing made by humans lasts forever, not even the things that feel like symbols. Hubble, wrapped in its expensive space blanket and steadied by its systems, has always been a negotiation between ambition and physics. Time makes the negotiation stricter. The telescope will keep doing what it can for as long as it can, and then the sky will hold its memory in the archive and in the expectations it created. That's not loss. That's completion, and completion can be calm when it's earned. So the conclusion lands softly. Hubble's most relaxing truth is the one it demonstrated over and over. Patience can be powerful without being intense. Looking can be an act of care. A mistake can be corrected without erasing the dream. Quiet work can reshape how a whole planet imagines the night. It builds a library of light that outlives any single moment of curiosity, and it taught you, without ever meeting you, that attention doesn't have to be loud to matter. Your room is still your room, steady and familiar. The fan still making that gentle, practical hush. The air still moving in slow circles that don't ask anything from you. The ceiling stays where it always is, calm and unbothered, and the night outside stays wide, holding its own silence the way space holds Hubble in orbit. No grip, no shove, just a quiet allowance. Worries can exist inside that allowance and still feel smaller, not because they aren't real, but because the universe has a way of placing them back into proportion with a gentle hand. Images settle behind your eyes like soft lanterns set down one by one. The deep field where nothing became crowded. The nebula edge glowing where young stars press light into gas. A pale arc of lensed light curving around a cluster like a slow smile. A tight, bright core hinting at a black hole's hidden weight. A pulsing star keeping time like a calm metronome. The telescope itself, wrapped in crinkly insulation, circling and circling, never in a hurry. Breath deepens. Shoulders grow heavier in the kindest way. Words become softer, longer, quieter, the way the ocean sounds when you stop trying to count the waves. Nothing needs fixing tonight. Nothing needs explaining tonight. Ancient photons have already done their traveling, and the sky will keep sending them whether you watch or not. And that steady generosity means rest is allowed without earning it. Sleep can arrive the way Hubble's orbit arrives again and again. Predictable, gentle, automatic. One more breath, one more exhale, one more small release of tension you didn't realize you were holding. The last thought is simple and warm. A telescope taught the world to look, and the looking was never wasted, even when it was quiet.